The gift he received from God was special. I could not become a warrior or a sorcerer, and not even a healer. A loud, sharp order to act forced the rent to nod. He clenched the piggy bank, slightly shaken her, preparing to do something. The serious expression of a guy ready to meet any danger has inspired confidence in his actions. He used the borrowed magical technique. A bright glow wrapped it, illuminating the figure. The piggy bank suddenly broke out, and something very similar to money flew out of the hole, so quickly that it could even injure. The rent stood courageously with the piggy bank in his hands, and the money broke out of her at a frantic speed, flying all the way and pouring everything around, what they could reach. The girl in the Viakni hat will forgive the boy in a hurry, because the trinity who beats the monster is no longer standing. They really need the help of Renz and his magic. The banknotes broke out sharply and flew to a guy with a heavy sword with a whistle, dangerously approaching his back. It seemed that they were about to attack him, but in reality, their goal was quite different, to give him a new power. They spent a good time with the guy as if they had become one with him, and he exhaled lightly. Suddenly, the knight clenched the sword stronger and squeezed out of all his throat, calling the monsters for battle. In his gaze, a new confidence and determination broke out. Now he was certain in his victory as never before. Using all his magical forces, he directed the last forces in a powerful blow. The explosion of incredible size covered the monster, leaving him no chance to survive. The rent almost broke out of the place with a powerful stream of wind. He closed his eyes, trying to hide from the flurry, but the explosion turned out to be even stronger. The boys were scattered in different directions, and a cloud of dust and sand flew into his eyes. Guy stayed still after his stunning victory, breathing hard and trying to restore his breath. It gradually came to him. He was able to win. He clenched the sword firmly in his hand, standing in the middle of the dust clubs after the explosion. The elder healer El smiled and said that this time the knight had surpassed everyone. Guy, an experienced warrior, smiled happy and barely restrained laughter. He was proud of himself. Misa, the oldest Magan, confidently added that now the victory will be for our strength. Rents sat straight on the ground, looked carefully at the heroes and smiled. For him, it was a victory with one blow. Well, isn't it cool? On his knee he was lying, and the explosive dust gradually settled, opening the consequences of a recent battle. The company advises to go this way to the very end. Rent receives a challenge in your specialty, the Keeper of Magic. 5 years ago, an event took place in the village of Alt, which changed everything. The baby shines with joy, holding a leaf in his hands, and shouts loudly that his profession is a sword. A very cool and exciting business. The guy nearby supports him, they say. Everything is wonderful. And someone remembers that this hero has already conquered the rank of D among adventurers. The guy proudly replies that he dreamed of becoming an adventurer since childhood, and finally got what he deserved. The mountain stood next to him, showed his leaf, and told that he was working as a blacksmith. Guy smiled and said it was very cool, and it is also a work with an E. The guy stated that he would only fight the weapon he pushed himself, and the young blacksmith with sadness confessed he also dreams of going in search of adventures. In this world, when a person turns 15, he receives a gift from God for a special rite of adulthood. Little Rent smiles and dreams of becoming so strong that everyone is admired by his traveler's feats. Suddenly, a little girl appears nearby and turns to the boy, trying to draw his attention. The Rent was very happy when he saw his girlfriend of the miss. The girl said that his name was mentioned in the church today. The church was dominated by an incomprehensible atmosphere, both creepy and fascinating. Massive doors, huge columns, and between them people with branches of trees in their hands. All this was surprised, but at the same time could make those who want to run away. The Rent looked around and realized that everything seemed strange and unusual to him. He approached a man who met a young man with a warm, good smile. The man turned to him as if to the Sacred Father. The man reached out to him and asked him to pray in front of the altar. He added that after that, the Creator will open the secret of his future life. Against the backdrop of high windows with sophisticated patterns of angels, the Rient put parchment to the forehead and mentally began to pray, sincerely asking to find out about his true purpose. At the entrance to the church, a crowd of teenagers gathered. Someone was waiting for friends, someone to go inside their turn. The Rent left the church. Misa was glad to see him and wondered if it was all over. Guy was also glad to see a young man. Everyone immediately began to ask how everything went, and looking forward to what role he got. Rint was awakened by the back of his back and showed a sheet where he was written by the Keeper of Magic. He said that even the Holy Father was surprised. and it turned out that he had a rank S. It stunned everyone around. Guy was quite surprised by such a high rank and immediately noted that it was a real rarity. Behind him, a crowd of curious people gathered, who also sought to see Ren's leaf. The guy looked more closely and noticed that the rent had magical power. Suddenly his gaze fell below, and he fell silent. He screamed in his thoughts, almost out loud. The power of the magic of this guy, as much as 1,200 units. Guy exclaimed that there could be no such, because the power of his magic is only 20. The girl nearby answered that she had magic, and that less. Only 13. The guy began to tremble and, holding his breath, asked what his strength was. The rent came closer. It was also interesting for him to look. He said his strength was to borrow magic, but people at first did not immediately understand what was being said. The Rience explained that, most likely, it is the ability to convey magical power to others. Guy asked sharply whether he would really be able to take someone else's magic and use it as much as he pleased. Miss came suddenly from behind and said it was funny. The guy was scared because of her sudden appearance. She says it is really a wonderful gift, even renting the level S. They ask if she really thinks. Mrs. smiled sincerely and greeted the boy with all his heart. The guy smiled and sincerely thanked the girl. The loan from the Keeper of Magic is just one of the skills. In fact, it allows you to accumulate a little more magical energy than usual. In general, this word denotes the energy that is spent when using a certain skill. During rest and sleep, the spent magical force is recovered automatically. However, there is a limit how much magic can be accumulated. It will never be possible to restore this limit. But he is able to store excess in his magical hiding place. Its capacity is equal to the maximum stock of magical power. It is up to 2,400 units. The rent was lying on the bed, looking thoughtfully in the ceiling, and he thought he had no idea if he could use his skills. He realizes that he was not even taught. But the guy remembered that he was once said, "The most important thing in magic is imagination." He looks at the shelf where there is an ordinary, inconspicuous piggy bank in the form of a pig. This is his old piggy bank in which he once collected a little. He decided to take it with himself and check whether he would be able to use a new thing with his abilities. Recent looks at the piggy bank and thinks that it will probably be able to store magic in it just like coins. Suddenly the piggy bank shone with a magical light. The guy finally realized that it could actually be a real piggy bank. He explains that this piggy bank will not be for pennies, but for magic. Suddenly, he stated that he would hide this money in a charming piggy bank, and at the same moment paper banknotes were circulated in the air and began to fly directly to the piggy bank. Just on the street, someone cheated skillfully, releasing a burning fire layer. The wren was quiet to the mass from the back, and suddenly used borrowed magic. The girl shuddered in surprise. She felt her strength return to her and happily told the boy that her magic was working again. The guy came closer and explained to the girl, in order to regain his strength, she needs to put her hand on the piggy bank and direct the flow of energy. Misa obeyed and put her hand on the piggy bank. At the same moment, she shone with a magical light. Recent gladly noted that the girl did everything right. Occasionally, he raised the piggy bank and smiled what it was. The rent replied that everything is simple here. It is the best embodiment of a real safe that he just managed to come up with. Misa is sharply returning to the guy to draw his attention to himself. She approached and asked the boy if he would like to join their adventure. The girl explained that they, with a boyfriend and a rent, were planned to create a detachment in a guild, and then they would look at whom they could still be invited to themselves. The guy was surprised and hoped that it was not a joke. The guy standing nearby hugged the rent by his shoulders and cheerfully assured, "Now there will be no problems with magic." But the Riance calmly explained that he would not be able to use magic how much he pleases. If he lends magic, then he must return it. The one who stood nearby nodded and said he understood everything. Mises smiled and said that the rent has repeatedly told him how he dreamed of a real life full of adventures. The rent smiled widely and said confidently, "Of course." He wondered sharply if they had already chosen the name for the group, and Guy said confidently that they had already decided everything. The guy proudly lifted his sword up and announced that the name of these weapons was the Sword of the Endless Sky. Over time, he added, this sword will become so powerful that the sky can cut off. Misa put her hand on his forehead and asked if the guy had changed his mind. The rent came closer and wanted to admit that he really liked it. The guy smiled even more sincere, but the girl, it seems, all this was not to the liking. Their team has a healer L who will be useful and will be able to help in difficult battles, healing the wounds of their comrades. So their incredible adventures began. They worked at frantic speed. The rent endowed everyone with magic forces. One by one, the monster fell victorious, all thanks to a coordinated teamwork. And yet, the total stock of magical force of the detachment was directly dependent on the number of its participants. At the local bar, men lively discussed a detachment of a celestial boundless sword. One of them, stretching a mug of beer, suddenly became interested in talking. Men discussed how it was able to rise from the initial rank F to the level of C. The detachment. The man was actually very fascinated by everything related to the endless sky. Guy suggested celebrating a well-done task and buying a new form for future adventures. Misa smiled happily and assured that she was very convenient to move in this form. Elle also agreed, adding that she was also happy. The rent looked back on the team and asked what would be with him, because he was still at its initial equipment. Guy said roughly that he did not need a new form, because he did not participate in the fighting. Il added that it would be nice to wash, because the boy sway sour. After such words, his shoulders dropped, and even more sadness appeared in his eyes. Compared to these three, its level increases much slower. After all, his skill works only under certain conditions. The one who gives strength sooner or later takes it back. But in his case, he finally felt that he was approaching the team, and wanted to say something about the magic they gained. Suddenly, Guy cut him sharply, turning around with a harsh expression. The Ren was suddenly discouraged, and, Red, began to assure that he was not referring to anything like that. He simply could not express himself. Earlier, when they were on an equal footing, they talked easily, and now everything has changed. The whole team communicates politely, forgetting the old images. As you grow older, you look not only at the world, but also at your own former beliefs. Elle strails on the ground loudly and exclaims the spell to strengthen his magic. The monster suddenly rushes to the Misu, but she instantly evades the impact and flesh. The girl targets his weapon and shouts the spell of the fiery tornado. The fire completely covered the monster, hiding it in his tongues of flames and slowly destroying the heat. The Grove squeezes the jaws with tension and threateningly mowing on the ground, preparing to rush simply at the monster. Waging his sword, he creates a blade of wind, a sharp, like a razor, gust of air. The giant monster was defeated, and lay without movement in the water. Guy smiles widely and carelessly throws his sword on his shoulder, his rank B. Elle blossoms with a joyful smile and says that today they have a common day of victories. Her rank is also B. Miss sighs and adds that the opponents were really weak, her rank B. The Rent stands behind and applauded the team enthusiastically, admiring their incredible trip. His rank? S. Guy, without paying attention to him, lifted his head with a proud look and stated that it was time to go to the guild and report it. He was looking forward to his assessment. The mass asked if they heard that their team was talking about the rank closest to the team A. The guy did not even doubt, just turned and went on. Behind, among the ruins, he noticed a chest. He shouted to the team, happily reporting that he had come across a treasure trove. It rains heavy on the street, drumming loudly on the roofs of the houses. In a small hotel, in one of the rooms, a lonely candle was dim. A narrow circle of darkness was dim around. The Rient was sitting in front of his team. His voice trembled from sadness. He did not understand what was happening. He looked at the boy with distrust, not believing any of his words. The guy interrupted him sharply and said that he did not make him repeat. He added that they need to get the top. He decided that it was necessary to gather new adventurers and create an updated detachment 2.0. And the Rent will stop entering the account. The guy frozen with an empty look. His eyes were filled with fear and disappointment, even red. Swallowing a ball in his throat, he uncertainly asked, "Why I am?" He could not understand why suddenly the whole team was looking at him with ironic smiles, as if they were completely indifferent. All three suddenly raised their hands, showing massive bracelets that shone brightly in the light of a small candle. The Rent was surprised to see that they wore bracelets from the same chest he found. Guy said that they appreciated this thing in the store, and even the owner himself was surprised, because it was surprisingly a rare exhibit. In addition, he explained that this bracelet is able to restore the owner every day to 1,000 units of magical energy. The guy estimated that there were 3 bracelets, and it was much more than he could offer them. The mass added that they needed magic, but not at all to make rent. The guy began to justify himself. They say, with these bracelets, he will be able to pass more than 5,000 units of magic. The Rent remarked that they could use any magic that they just want, right? At this point, Guy jumped sharply from the table. He began to say that it was all that happened. Guy sharply grabbed the guy by his neck, lifted him in the air. The Rient began to breathe. The air was getting smaller. He looked at the boy strictly, said he was about to try it, and ordered to try to get out. The Rent felt as if something was squeezing. He could not even move. I really wanted to get out, but the body failed. There was no strength. Guy continued to strictly look directly at the guy. warning him not to see himself as a wise man because he has very little magic. The rent is quietly asking for to stop. He lacks air. He wants to breathe again on his chest. He completely faint and feels powerless. His eyes roll, tears flow across the face, and the guy does not believe that he will be released. He confesses that he suffers from terrible pain. He looks at Guy with pain, hoping that he will let him go. Little by a little hand, he clenched the guy by her neck, weakened. Rent fell to the ground, breathing hard and trying to breathe. Elle laughing loudly joining that guy had a very fun mind. He looked fiercely at his former team, breathing hard and trying to calm his breath. Miss also looked at him strictly and wondered that it was a strange look. She added that Guy fully supports. She asked sharply, did he really want her to regret it? The rent wanted to answer something, but the treacherous words stuck in his throat. He could not utter a sound. Everything was burning and anger inside. The guy could no longer stand, ran out of the building, crowded with insult. Ella mocked his hand mockingly, smiling cunningly and shouting it goodbye. Guy smiled and noted that finally one problem is less. Now they don't have to endure him. The mass added that this dishonor had to be expelled for a long time. Guy laughed in response and noted that the girl was really cruel. The Riance was stepping slowly, soaking through the storm, and a bitter insult and anger on the old team stuck in her throat. He remembered the scales of Guy, who tried to stifle him, this time with his fist. In this situation, he was completely powerless. His strength has become a real discovery, for all the gift of S-Rang is extremely rare. Just stand behind and transmit magical energy. Notwithstanding more, the guy threw the piggy bank that carried on his shoulders. She fell on the ground with a roar, all soaked in rain. The Riance is sadly looking into the ground, and rainy drops flow quietly across her hair. It seemed that even the sky was adjusting to her mood. The young man confessed to emptiness that he never sought everything. Remembering the face of the Trinity, he realized that they were all. He thought, did he really not be worth anything? Is that why he was put out for the door? Tears performed in the eyes of the rent. He thought that if all this is true, he once gave all the magic I copy. He could no longer tolerate, he exclaimed into the void of the rain, demanding to regain all the power he was taken away. He continued silently in the middle of an empty street, immersed in a thick curtain of the rain. Suddenly, the boy in his head was thought. He fulfilled all the conditions for the evolution of his gift. The rent was surprised, and his voice continued to speak. He explained that the repository turned into an endless, magical space. The guy was just wondering where this mysterious voice came from. Suddenly, a little fairy appeared and turned to Rento, calling him Lord and greeting his new level. Such an unexpected acquaintance surprised the boy. The little fairy greeted the boy with joy on the fact that he evolved him and called it his master. She smiled sweetly and frozenly and said she was very glad to get acquainted with him. For him, it became the most pleasant instant. Suddenly, she came closer and confessed that she couldn't think, as she had to wait 5 years after her master has become an adult. Rint opened his eyes wide. He uncertainly showed her finger and quietly said that he asked loudly if she was a heat fair. The trap smiled wide and confirmed that he guessed correctly. He recalls how a village priest told him about a fairy who protects him and has a special gift. The story was true. The girl barely bowed noticeably and said with a smile that she was very glad. She introduced herself as a charming planner, but for the boy, she suggested just to call her Meppy. The fairy smiled warmly and said that she was looking forward to getting to know her more close. Red thought she was sweet and wondered what to say to him now. Suddenly, the fairy screamed in the whole voice. She was amazed at the boy's appearance and immediately asked why he was so neglected. The guy himself at first and could not understand what was happening. Moby pulled out the accountant and began to list. An iron bib, a shabby cloth, pants made of coarse fabric, and then sharply asked, "And these are these sandals?" She threw the bills on the table and said sharply, 116 coins. It is so much that the guy can buy at least more or less decent equipment. She added that if the guy really wants to work, he should look respectively. Rent suddenly realized that something strange was with her. The guy asked how his gift changed, and the fairy replied that now is the time to look at the scroll. Mappy explained that when the skill develops, the content of the scroll is also changing. The Rent looked closely at his parchment and noticed there were really changes. Now his ability was called an endless magical repository. He remembered how his ancient comrades also became stronger. For example, Guy, who was a regular sword, later turned into a true master of this art. He noticed that his rank was SSS, and wondered if there was something higher than the usual S rank. In response, the fairy only laughed mysteriously. She pointed to something and suggested that the guy look there. The unknown symbol attracted his attention, and the guy asked the fairy what it was. Moppy replied that it was an infinity sign. She lifted this piggy bank and proudly stated that now there is nothing to worry about the boy, because from now on it can keep an endless amount of magic. The Riant did not immediately understand what Fairy said, so he just stood silently and looked in front of himself. At that moment he finally saw. The essence of all this riddle opened before him, and suddenly he really realized what the word infinity means. Moppy began to explain that there are two conditions to create an endless magical repository. First, the guy should have a sufficient stock of magical power. The girl vividly replied that the second condition is an extremely strong feeling. He had fervently, with all his heart, to want to thank for kindness. The Rent remembered how he had just shouted in the whole voice. The girl suddenly noted that this was a very simple condition, and asked why the guy spent 5 years to fulfill her. Rent shouted sharply that in fact everything is much more complicated than it seems. The fairy in response only smiled ironically. Suddenly, he shot himself, and he had already admitted that he was very scared. The young man began to say that he was always patient and tried to act for the benefit of his former team. It seemed to him that if he asked to return the magic, they would just get back on their feet again. They would certainly give everything back. Miras smiled and said that the guy was very good. It surprised him, but at the same time brought joy. For the first time in a long time, he heard praise. The fairy sharply called him a good-natured local fool and smiled. The Rent did not like it at all, and he immediately made it clear that he was outraged. Moppy hugged him by his shoulders, assured that nothing special had happened, and suggested to look if there was something interesting. The guy again focused on the parchment, looking carefully at fresh changes. He was confused, seeing the number 2,678,087. Such a big one. He was confused and asked in the fairy what it was for the number. Matt smiled slightly and explained that it was the amount of magical force he handed over to the team. Rente was stunned by such a significant number. He did not expect to see such a large figure at all. The fairy has specified that it is magic, transmitted in all 5 years. She explained that the number below shows how much magic he needs to collect. 1,435,837 units. Added that so much can be accumulated in only a year. From now on, this has become his new ability, forced to collect magic. The voice of Ranta was shaken when he finally realized that he can force the magical energy from the dead. He realized that he could regain all the energy he had once given to others. The fairy was barely noticeably smiling, watching a guy who seems to be really liked by this idea. Only now did he realize it. Why was her face so cruel? He asked Marie loudly and sharply how it could take advantage of this ability. The fairy tried to reassure the guy. She explained that it is necessary to fulfill certain conditions for activation, to conclude a contract with the debtor. The Wren was particularly remembered by this word. Mobby said that there are different ways of forced return of magic, but they are quite difficult, though if you think carefully, it is possible. The fairy strongly told the boy to trust her and not interfere. The Riant smiled with Phi. He was ready to trust her. 2 men who passed by cast a suspicious look at the guy. They were waiting for one question. Who did the guy talk to the tree with? They did not see the fairy, so they were surprised, watching someone with an empty air. They decided not to touch that guy and the past, because they thought it would be the best. Finally, the rain was over and a new sunny day began. Again, a cozy hotel from which the guy came out of and said that yesterday evening was just wonderful. He rejected all the extra thoughts and told the boys that it was time to go to the guild and look for a new friend. But suddenly, something suddenly cut off his reflections. He just appeared in front of them, lifting his head with pride. The team was amazed, because they did not expect to see it at all here. The guy asked why he suddenly returned. Elle smiled, apologized, and reminded that that boy had long been crossed out of their company. The swordsman agreed, and added that there is no more space for him. Nissa said the guy came just in time. In her hands she kept a bag that she was rudely thrown. The bag fell to his feet. The girl added that he could pick her up. She added that the owner of the hotel had tried collecting this junk. Misa slowly noticed that they did not have the idea what to do with all these things. The Rent suddenly slipped the sheet right before their eyes. He listed all the many magical forces they borrowed and reported to the team. The guy did not understand at first, but he asked if they were ready to return absolutely everything that had been selected over the years. The team did not like it how he formulated it, and Misa asked directly what the guy thought. The Rent sharply ordered them to be silent. He began to think, probably everyone has known for a long time that when you lend something, all this must be returned. On the faces of the boys, Complete surprise, they do not understand what is happening. The rent continued, emphasizing that his gift is not some worthwhile bracelet on his hand. The young man wanted to start his opinion by contacting him. He suddenly grabbed the boy for clothes and lifted him above the ground. He looked at the guy just in the eye and asked if he was really able to turn everything back. He did not like such lightness and disdain at all. The Rient looked around. Moprot flew completely nearby. The guy grossly demanded that the rent shows more respect for them. El sarcastically giggled. The annuity tried to pick up the words to express what he really wanted and to regain confidence. Having disappeared underground, Guy heavily breathed and answered as the team ordered him. Lying on earth, he politely asked him to return all the magic that the team took away from him. Guy stepped on his head and stated with contempt that they would never be allowed him. Then he ordered the guy not to appear to their eyes anymore, and the girls laughed behind his back, staring at the pathetic Ren, who lay the defeated. The worn and exhausted wandering lies just on the ground, all in dust and dirt. The guy just walked past and sharply threw a short goodbye. He sharply turned, raised his hand, and with irony in his voice, threw that they would be calculated any other time. The rent was still lying on the ground. He was heard again. Slowly palm he goes through sand, from pain, rage, and insults. He just did not want to let it go. Slowly opened his eyes, he breathed hard at the backs of his former comrades. Suddenly, the Central Information Agency reported that the debtor managed to install, and the contract has already been executed. The fairy flew closer and told her master that he could now take advantage of a new skill. The rent rose from the ground. In his gaze burned anger and insult. He was ready to repay the debt. He turned on his new skill, forced collection. Walking slowly forward, the team discussed what the guy was annoying. Ella admitted that she was very surprised that the guy tried to return to them. The guy replied that after everything he had caused him, it is no longer necessary to return. Misa decided that he should give a real lesson, so that he remembered it for a long time. Guy smiled maliciously and joked that the girl was still cruel. She smiled and turned to Guy. Suddenly, magic escaped, turning into paper money, the same ones that they had somehow rented. In a moment, a frantic amount of magical force at frantic speed disappeared from the team. Misa felt something strange for a moment. The guy wondered what had happened. The girl answered sharply that everything was fine. He suggested that the girl apparently had already felt a careful look of Ren. Misa did not like it at all. She smilingly told him not to speak nonsense, and the whole team exploded with cheerful laughter. A mysterious label appeared on the neck of the missing, leaving a mysterious mark on her body. Marie lowered her head and quietly asked him for forgiveness. Rent was surprised and asked what happened to the girl. She said that the boys seemed stronger than the rented apartment, and the guy heard something offensive in it. The fairy added that it also seemed like that, but the rent called her. Marie smiled cunningly and assured that she only joked. I doubted a little more, but her words still reassured me a little. A few more notes of magic force flew the street like paper banknotes. They all went to the small window at the top of the house to return to their native piggy bank. Suddenly, all the paper money that the team got in the form of magic power began to fly directly into the hoof at a frantic speed. It was extremely scared by the guy. He was surprised and asked if it really worked. The fairy replied that the fee was succeeded and everything went through according to the contract. The waitress looked at the guy with surprise. Marie continued and explained that from now on, all their accumulated magical energy will automatically gather in his piggy bank. Recent was surprised that, having viewed parchment, the amount of magic in storage even increased. Suddenly, a familiar voice prompt sounded in the boy's head. A condition for new skill was fulfilled. He was no longer surprised by such a message. It happened not for the first time. The voice added that the annuity has mastered a new skill, a magical action, and next to the fairy, which immediately rushed into the eyes, that the guy gained a new skill. Magical operation or skill that absorbs its own or accumulated magical energy, thereby increasing the maximum stock of user magic at the moment. If you spend 1,000 units, its maximum magic will increase per unit. The fairy, which usually asks almost nothing, asks excitedly, "Is everything okay?" The annuity clumsily scratched the back of the head and confessed that he hoped to see something steeper and more powerful. Marie smiled easily and wondered what the guy was saying, adding that it was a wonderful ability to develop. The guy was frightened and hurried to her because it was her smile that alarmed him. Meanwhile, the fairy was lightly jumping, reminiscent of her presence. Even if it increases its level of magic, it does not matter. The stock in it, and so enough for eternity. He turned to the fairy and reminded her that she mentioned the ways of forced gathering. Is that really so? What are the methods? The fairy smiled cunningly and promised to tell everything briefly and clearly. She began to explain that there were 3 types of compulsory penalties. The first attempt is a special way that allows you to collect all magic just once. The second way is to pay in parts when they agree in advance, how much to pay and what amounts. And here's the third. The fairy smiled adjudically and explained that the third way, known as the gate to hell, is constant payments. The Riants did not understand anything, so the fairy added, "It was such a treaty that you have concluded today." The guy wondered why the renewal fee was so afraid. Marie replied that there were really enough reasons for excitement. She began to explain, "It is a trap like sand, from which it is impossible to get out, at least as it was. The most modical way of picking is true hell." The girl said that only the amount had to be paid, and mysteriously added that almost all the rent was cancelled. Isn't this the same as payment? The fairy explained that installments are, in fact, dividing the amount into parts and gradual penalties. Even if daily payments are difficult, the debtor still sees the ultimate goal: full repayment of the debt. She suddenly added that the restored debt was a completely different thing, and the rent has expanded her eyes, not understanding anything. She explained that even if the borrower takes $110,000, the amount of monthly payment remains unchanged for him. The rent was interested in, and the girl decided to explain everything on the example of his former team. The magic stock is 3,600 units. Recovery, 360, i.e. 10% of the total stock per hour, and it gives 8,640 units per day. Another 3,000 can be restored separately. Therefore, as many as 11,640 magical units can be accumulated in a day. The fairy smiled, held her hand on a baka and said, "If you look on the other hand, after receiving the loan, you can count on 1,435,837 units. Of these, 10% can earn 115,000 mysteries and 10% by 8% by the end of the year." So, the rent has sharply interrupted her, clarifying whether he will have to pay some percent for the use of his abilities. The girl continued to smile and had fun that the boy, of course, would have to pay, because the endless magical repository has its price. The guy immediately noticed that the fairy was saying as if she were an experienced moneylender. Mappy added that if you collect 11,640 every day, 116,400 is collected for 10 days. For the same period, the interest is 115,000. Ranta gradually reached a new awareness. The girl smiled ominously and continued for him. The principal amount of debt is almost not diminished. She added that Ladari only pay interest, and as soon as a new month begins, the debt is only increasing. The guy listened to all this with a stunned mind. He asked the carrier loudly and sharply whether they really concluded such an agreement. She only smiled sarcastically and calmly confirmed that it was true. Rint mentioned that fairy entrusted. She assured that everything would be fine and there is nothing to worry about. The girl reminded that the former team of the boy never thanked him, so it was time for them to receive. The fairy further told that they were offended and expelled from the detachment, which they created together. Her voice suddenly became sharp. She stated that such scum was not a place for pity. The wren was surprised to change her behavior and tried to reach the girl's common sense. The smile of the fairy became wild, almost inhuman. He stated that they needed to be found, crushed with force, to throw despair in the abyss, and make everything regret everything. The girl added that they may not be fully able to do so. The Riant called the fairy loudly, sharply turning her attention and tearing out of the stream of crazy thoughts, and the girl immediately sounded. The guy confessed that he was almost frightened to death, and Meppy only replied that she simply expressed her emotions. People could not squeeze why this guy suddenly yelled. The Rent replied that everything is not at all as it seems. The fairy only smiled sarcastically. The Rent slowly bowed his head, plunging into his reflections. Moby explained that in fact this contract can be changed at any time. The guy understood all this. The girl wondered, would the guy ever apologize for this nonsense? To which the Rent only replied that he would think about it. The fairy noted that the guy was too good. She quickly swept and, smiling, added that he was a good simple. The Rent was dissatisfied with such a nickname and ordered her to stop. Guild sign, which called for new participants to join their team. The girl pointed to herself and stated that it was capable of theft and still very fast from nature. But the team immediately replied that they did not need such talents. The man in the dark told that he possesses dark magic, and yet, that not as old as it seems. The team first only shrugged, they say. Additional troubles with the infirm old man to nothing. Guy suddenly rose from the chair and announced loudly that the set was completed, and asked everyone to disperse. He was outraged that only the failures themselves gathered today. Eltrout lifted her chin high and boldly stated that none was worth such a wonderful detachment as them. The guy cheerfully supported her opinion, fully agreeing. Misa lifted parchment and noted that this adventurer looks very useful, noting that he is a sniper. Guy began to look carefully at the sheet in his hands. The young man realized that this guy was very reminiscent of him. He asked unexpectedly in the missions if she had delayed the rent. The girl bowed her head and said quietly that she sincerely hated him, and rejoices from the fact that she finally got rid of him. The girl said that thanks to these adventures she learned a lot. Talking about the guys she likes, she added that she appreciates those who know the price well, confident in herself, reliable, and has a strong character. Guy seemed to understand something and looked at the girl with some strange curiosity. Elle shouted sharply to the girl so that she would not approach her boyfriend. She asked this Missa immediately, "What time is they from?" Guy just laughed at everything that happened. Suddenly his gaze stopped on a strange sign on the girl's neck, and he turned to her asking what it was. The Missu was surprised. The guy on his neck also had the same sign, and it was a lot of impressed by Elle's. They looked at the girl, and it turned out that each team member was next in line. Miss looked in the mirror and asked in surprise what it was. Elle suggested that it was similar to a magical symbol, and Guy replied loudly that he would not be called at all. The girl suggested checking her statuses. Perhaps it will help to understand what is happening to them. The girl looked at the parchment and realized with horror that all her magical power had disappeared. Maria, turning into a sheet of paper banknotes, immediately flew and found herself on the roof of one of the houses. They all flew straight into the Reina piggy bank, gathering there. The guy noticed that the magic increased again in the repository, and near the fairy laughed under his nose. Moppy assured that she was absolutely sure that the previous team of the hero is now in full shock because of everything that happened. The Rient thought, "What? How do they find out what is it behind all?" He was quite convinced that they would go in search of him. The fairies asked with interest, "Is the guy really afraid of them?" She added that if so, let this guy just get a well. The Rent could not believe his ears that he could give someone a shock. Even such a team. He opened his eyes wide, looked at the fairy, and honestly confessed that he would definitely not have the strength to do so. The fairy picked up the piggy bank and flew up with her, asking the boy if he had acquired new skills. After handing him a piggy bank, she suggested that he immediately test all the new abilities he had just received. The Rient was looking intently at his clay pig, as if he saw this piggy bank for the first time in his life. Gradually, the true meaning of everything that happens began to reach him. Yes, the fairy was the following condition for receiving a new gift. Moppy smiled mysteriously, hinting at some secret, but the fairy remembered how the master of the master called for her that day. She screamed of her unbearable days, full of pain, and begged for the emergence of a new adventure in this world. She survived a lot through a life in which she had to hold on to others constantly, but all this was left behind. From now on, he will choose his way and live incredible adventures, creating his own story. Mappy assured the Rent that he was really very strong, and advised him to believe more often in his own strength. She smiled, and assured that she would always support her master if he suddenly had any difficulties. Tears shouted in the eyes of the guy. He was incredibly grateful to the fairy for her warm words. "You smile sincerely and thank you from your heart." The girl wondered what plans he had for the future. She explained that, in addition to gathering magic, she also hopes to increase the level and achieve further growth. The Rent was happy, and immediately remembered the wonderful place that he could offer. She said that there is an artificial lake on the outskirts of Melba, created once an ancient sorcerer. Rint said that after creating a detachment, a workout took some time. Mobby wondered where this city is. He was told that there were considerable distance to him. Even on a fast carriage, the road will take almost 2 weeks. The fairy quickly calculated everything. Everything was obvious to her. She assured that even if the scum was rushed, it would give them some time. Mappy suggested going to the city right now, and the Rent was decisively jumped, immediately supporting the idea. The fairy wondered. There are 3 more weeks ahead. The girl smiled evil and said that in 3 weeks they would gain so much strength to challenge the team of the guy from whom he once was. She tried carefully to wash away strange traces that suddenly appeared on her skin. A huge carriage filled with people moved forward in an unknown direction. The exile settled on a chair, closed his eyes, and plunged into his thoughts. While the guy was sitting, he applied the skill of magical operation. The Rients appealed to the fairy, reporting that they would only spend 1,000. He immediately increased his maximum supply of mana by 10 units. He did not have time to do it, as the voice of the system suddenly sounded. The condition was fulfilled. Now, using magical techniques, magical power is restored twice as fast. The guy was surprised, because his strength increased twice. Usually the recovery gave only 10%, so such a result was a real find for him. The fairy winked and noted that it was far from the limit, but they would still be careful and use it all with maximum care. The man in front of the cart informed that he was going to Melba, so they should hurry. The Heavenly Sword team stood in the wizard's shop. The man looked at the symbol on the girl's neck and searched for something similar in his book, but in vain. Nothing coincided. Everything looked completely different. The old man asks a few questions. Maybe it's part of some ancient writing? He still does not understand that it is a sign, and Miss is already eagerly asking. Is he still not realizing what it is? The man replied that he has been working in this case for over 80 years, and could not imagine that he would ever meet a sign that he did not know. The guy approached sharply and asked loudly why he suddenly reacts so emotionally. He persistently demanded that the old man immediately solve their problem. The man immediately apologized, blushing. The team went on a trip. Guy waved sharply with his sword, with one blow destroying the monster standing in front of her. Miss reached forward, and at the same moment a fire broke out under her palm, which immediately cleared the path, throwing the monster away. Guy ran his hand on the cheek, and only then realized that he got a blow. The wound was hurt by a sharp strip. The young man was surprised because usually the monsters did not even have time to touch him. Now, because of this, he became angry even more. Nissa got out of the potion bag, smiling. They were lucky because this spell is not eternal. She assured that they would be able to cope if they drink potions and restore magic. In her hands, there was a bottle of expensive restorative potion. It cost as much as 10,000 gold. The guy wondered how many girls had such bottles, and she said that about 50, and showed a bag in which they all lay. The guy was surprised by such a large number of potions. Misa calmly replied that she had given 500,000 of gold. He just sighed and said that they would have to do what they had. Misa replied that the bottles would ever end, so you need to get rid of their cabbage. The boy was angry. For him, all this became a real darkness. Pressing his hand to the wound, he asked Ellie to help him heal. The girl replied that she couldn't do it, because she no longer left magic. Guy did not joke. He leaned to her close, thundered that all her words were nonsense, and strictly ordered to drink potion to regain strength. The girl tried to deny, they say. It is too bitter. The guy ordered her to stop acting like a small child, and asked if she was in no way capable without magical potion. Elle could not stand. The tears escaped themselves and she burst out aloud. Miss and Grove only silently watched it. The guy moved forward. The nerves were on the verge, and from all this he was terribly tired. Miss tried to stop him, but the guy shouted to break away, and asked if he was his fault that Elle did not want to regain her magic forces. Elle did not stop crying loudly and shouting that she did not want to drink potions, although in fact, she dreamed of regaining her magic forces. Miss grabbed the boy by the hand, trying to stop him, and for a moment she thought, suddenly I mentioned the rent. Suddenly, the girl slowly began to realize that she did not want to believe it. For her all this seemed absolutely incredible. In her head was the idea that perhaps the one who imposed this spell. Guy and Elle listened carefully to the girl interested in her story. Nissa slowly turned to the Anahus, accusing him of everything, and in the meantime he sat quietly in the carriage and listened to the noise of the ferry. He looked at the girl and asked if she really likes to admire nature, to which the fairy was sincerely admitted. She loves it. She asked sharply what a volcano was visible in the distance. The Rent replied that it was Gramau Mountain, and added that there were rumors. There may be a dragon's nest on its top. Sparks of joy and genuine curiosity were shown in the eyes of Melba. The Rent was gently smiled, moved by the behavior of the fairies. He always believed that Marie knew everything in the world, but as it turned out, it was not. Today is the 6th day of his journey. All this time, he constantly absorbed magic, expanding his capabilities to the limit. Due to this, its current figure is as much as 4,709. It is almost at the level of a real big magician. Yes, managing magic is a truly incredible ability. Although he is allowed to freely manage magical energy, if necessary to transfer it to the repository or back. In fact, he is not yet very able to use it. But this is only a matter of time. According to Mepi, over time, everyone will understand and feel the true strength of this skill. Now the guy can only sit, so he is eagerly waiting for his following changes. Mepi looked out the window with a childhood joy, fascinated by looking around the living nature. Suddenly, the system said and announced that 350,000 units were spent on the magical operation. She then added that the condition was fulfilled. the level of magical operation increased by 1. The purchase skill is accessible phrase stunned. At first, he did not immediately realize what it means. He came closer and said that our master had really coped with it. The Rience did not understand anything. He looked intently into the parchment, but said there was nothing new. The fairy explained that he just waved it. The guy was already surprised. Moppy clearly pointed her finger what to do, persistently pushing the guy to the action. She still added that if you spend your finger up from the top. The Rent did it. As soon as he ran up his finger, a bunch of new information appeared on the parchment. The guy expanded his eyes in surprise. Everything he saw was striking. The fairy smiled and asked, "Wasn't that a wonderful choice?" The Rent has closely running through the text, especially focusing on the new skills that have appeared on the list. Mappy explained that all these gifts were given to humans by God, and it was usually impossible to get them. The guy wondered if you can really buy them. The fairy smiled ominously, realizing that he had solved her plan. The girl explained that all this happens because of her unique SSS rank skill. When the Mopri finished her monologue, she wondered what hero the guy wanted to become, and what adventure she wanted to go. She assured that she was always ready to help with advice, and in the end emphasized, now, he can master almost any skill. 2 weeks passed, and the couple finally got to the city of Melba. The Rent stopped in the middle of the street and looked around carefully. The fairy noted that it was really very crowded here, and the guy replied that the adventurers from all over the world came here to pass the giant maze of Melba. Do not ask with annoyance. Rent appeared here at the very beginning of his journey, right? The man confirmed that it was. They went to a small shop. A beautiful girl wondered whether the boy belonged to a group, and then asked if he was really sure that she wanted to move from his former city to Melba. In response, the guy briefly and confidently confirmed it. The girl smiled and reported that the registration was completed successfully. The guy just got the right to challenge the great laboratory of the Rins, and she sincerely congratulated him with this important event. Recent said it would give him a good advantage. The fairy fiercely smiled and assured that even if these abominations really dare to come, they should not be afraid of them. The couple approached the giant maze. They stopped at the very entrance to the great maze of Melba. The fairy lifted his head up and said that it was here that there were real dungeons. She cheered her master to move on, and the guy gladly agreed. They moved forward, starting their new, fascinating adventure. The first level, large plains. Recommended level for adventure, F. Moppy looks forward and asks how it turned out that they were here. The guy explains in response, this is a large maze of Melba. He suggested that this space once created an ancient sorcerer, although no one knows for sure. Suddenly, a sound came from the grass, which immediately attracted their attention. They appeared in front of a few minotibers, small rats, but extremely fierce and predatory. And they also loved hunting for people. Recent grabbed weapons and turned his gaze on the demons that suddenly appeared before him. Everything happened very in time. The guy was just the opportunity to test his skills. The rats rushed forward, swinging through their paws, ready to attack and break the Rent with their teeth. The guy recalls how Meppy talked about one skill that is great for a close range of battle. It immediately interested him. The Rent pulled out a small dagger and explained to the carrier that he was wearing it for self-defense. However, he recognized he almost did not have to use it. Meppy winked and replied that it was wonderful, but now it is time to try weapons in fact. The Rent rushed forward and struck the first blow, injuring a small rat. This is the art of a beginner aphorist. To use it, you will have to lay out 1,000 coins of Mr. The guy waved again with a dagger, straightening his next rat on his way. Feeling a rush, he easily destroyed one rat after another. The fairy and the carriage talked about the next type of attack. These were attacks from a long distance. Recent decided that he needed such magic that can be used simply, quickly, and without any mistakes. So he offered the girl one and only option. Rat, with a thickening from the back, fiercely opened his mouth, trying to bite the guy alive. But he skillfully threw his hand back, preparing to strike a powerful blow. The Rent sharply waved his hand and released a fiery ball. This is a basic first-level spell. You need to spend 1,000 megapixels to use it. The Rent stood in the lane, breathing hard after the attack. His hand looked as if he had a little burning. Soon the fairy swam closer and exclaimed enthusiastically, wondering the boy's abilities. She praised loudly that he had mastered magic so quickly. The Rent himself developed his abilities. Now he has become more agile, faster, and even mastered magic. He confessed that all this was made possible by the advice of Meppy. Next to them, just in the grass, lying, a small figure, which the sun illuminated in some strange way. The fairy saw jokes from the rats, and the guy explained that it was all thanks to a magic stone. The anniversary explained further. When you kill a demon in the dungeon, it turns into a magic stone. Its power depends on the power of the monster. And if you bring this stone to the guild, you can exchange it for money. Fair's eyes broke out of grip, and she asked impatiently if it was true. She added that she had a moment of an incredible rush of inspiration. The rent looked around and saw a small group of people who were desperately waved by wounded hands, trying to fight away from rats. The girl shouted that she had almost no medicines left for recovery. The guy hurried her in response, calling to move faster. After all, if everything goes according to the plan, they will earn good on it. Meppy laughed and called them ordinary newcomers, and the rent noted that they once were the same. The guy remembers how he always stayed behind and only reinforced the team with magical power. The fairy smiled and looked carefully at the rats. Noticing her, they moved to them immediately, which the girl immediately told the boy. The annuity, without a drop of fear in his eyes, lifted the dagger and immediately dealt with the rats. Now everything has changed for him. A completely different life is ahead. His heart is crazy in his chest. He had never worried about anything like that. The young man sits on a stone and looks at his feet thoughtfully. He stretched his hand forward and suddenly applied therapeutic magic. Even the simplest spell of the healing of the first level took up to 1,000 units of magical energy. Moppy had fun circling nearby and glad that at such a pace would soon be able to move to a new level. The guy only nodded back, agreeing with that. Suddenly, he smiled widely and said the empty man that he would like to stay for a year to better try himself. Moppy smiled widely in response and said it was a really cool idea. Rent and Mass are sitting in a trolley, clinging to each other, and quietly go somewhere. The young man suddenly returns to the girl and asks if she remembers his dream of going. Misa smiled widely and confidently replied that, of course, she remembers everything. Suddenly, the girl put her hand on his palm and confessed that she was constantly thinking about him, from which the guy immediately slammed. She added that, having become an adventurer, she decided she wanted to be near him. Mrs. Face became harsh, and talking in a rude tone, she stated that this guy was actually completely unable to. The rent was sharply jumped out of bed. He was breathing hard. A fairy lay quietly nearby and thoughtfully sadly. Was it really a dream? He wondered. The next day, the team went to a new level, to the big maze of Melba. They were at the second level, where they were already waiting for a large goblin type C, the recommended task for adventurers of level E. The rent was carefully moving forward between the trees, noticing how thick the earth was overgrown here. Touching the chin with your finger, he activated the skill of detecting the presence of the first level. It took 5,000 megapixels. Ren warns, not just a few goblins, but a whole colony. He feels it with a bow. The guy understands that it is not difficult to handle them alone. Each of them is weak. But the trouble is that they usually attack the group. And then there are real problems. A fairy flies nearby and smiles ominously, giving a treacherous funny. She believes that it is time to finally apply the guy's new skills in practice. The guy agreed with her, because she realized she was right. It is time to get stronger. Rent activates the first level signal blocking skill, spending 5,000 megapixels. With one blow, the guy dealt with the first goblin, and in a moment he quickly removed the second. In the small village of Goblin, every dreamer found a matter to his liking and did what he liked the most. I found and took the rent that someone hid in the bushes near the village. Slowly lifting the piggy bank, he applied the skill to release magical energy. The goblins of Spot first looked closely at the guy, waiting for him the next step. But suddenly their patience broke up. They spread their mouths and rushed to the guy with an attack. Paper banknotes filled with magical energy slowly settled down, while burning in the air before touching the ground. Sleeping, the rent reached forward, and with the help of his strength created several fiery balls. The balls accurately hit each goblin on the way, instantly destroying them. Smoke clubs were climbing from Goblin Village, opening up the true picture of what is happening there. The annual looked directly in front of him, and realized that he could now be constantly speaking. And he liked this thought. The use of magical power greatly depletes the body, becomes a real test for the body. Fairy Astermaster asked the guy if he could run long without stopping. He replied that he would not withstand such a load. She explained that with magic, the same. Using it continuously, too quickly you exhaust all the strength. The fairy added that if you use the release of magical energy, you can wrap yourself with magic and release them out when needed. Moppy explained that the spell can be used one by one, and now also produce a few at a time. The rent was carefully moving forward, looking around and trying to understand whether he really succeeded. Suddenly, a huge figure of goblin grew up in front of the guy. It was the leader of the colony, the real leader of the goblin. The rent released a few more fire shells, which, flying to Goblin's body, flew in explosions. He burned to the ground, leaving only ashes. The theory was happily exclaiming that everything succeeded, and the guy in response only laughed nervously. The girl exclaimed that he had overlooked a whole colony of goblin. The rent smiled and replied that he was not here, somewhere near the ferry. Moppy laughed awkwardly and noted that it was extremely cute on his part. The fairy with determination squeezed the cam and lifted it up, stating that it was necessary to continue to act with the same passion. The couple went to the guild. A pretty girl stood next to Teresa and announced that the stones left by Goblin would now be weighed. There were 1,341 of them in total. She explained that it was equivalent to 134,100 gold. The girl continued, "For the head of the goblin leader, the guy will receive 10,500 gold. Another 42,000 will be added to this, the cost of all the trophies he has collected during the adventure." The girl was preparing to calculate and name the total amount that would get the boy. In the end, the total amount was 186,600 gold. The girl put a huge bag in front of the boy. The guy almost fell, and the fairy was already shining from such a mountain of money. The night fell into the city, and the guy together with his friend was resting in a small hotel. Fairy with appetite savored fried squid, not looking from her plate. She was a great pleasure in a hearty dinner which she just ate. Rent said that thanks to joint work, their group raised the rank from E to D. He also understood, if you continue to use new skills, you can become even more powerful. Squeezing his fist, the guy understands that if he continues to work on himself, he will be able to stand up for himself and give away the grove. This thought fills him with determination to train even more persistently. The fairy smiled satisfied and explained, "Now that the guy moved to another city, the former team will not be able to find him for a long time. But as soon as they learn about the new contract, they will immediately rush to his search." Mappy explained that they need to collect another 150,000 units. She added that in this case they will be able to acquire new skills, and then they won't have to be afraid of nothing. The rent is upset, because 150,000 units are really a huge amount, and so much they are very far. But the fairy confidently replied that they would be able to cope, and there is no reason to worry. She folded her hands as if in prayer, and sincerely thanked the boy for treating. The girl asked the girl if she wanted to order something else, and the fairy was wondered if there were any other goodies. The guy smiled and said that a girl could eat as much as you like. So he wanted to thank her for everything she did for him. Mappy smiled and said that this time she needed his magic power. The guy asked in surprise and almost immediately received an honest answer. For her magical power is the best delicacy, a real nectar. The rent was surprised again and reproached that she would have to tell her abilities earlier. The fairy was outraged that it is much more important to become a master for her. The guy wondered how much she wanted. Moppy smiled, surprised his agreement, and invited 100. The annual took the piggy bank and asked how to handle it properly. He even suggested that this needed some special skill. The fairy strangely leaned her lips, which was a lot of surprise to the guy. The girl explained that direct contact was needed, and the rent immediately understood everything. But the fairy added that this is the best and fastest way, you just need to agree the guy. But he is only insulted in response to his lips. He put Meppy on his palm and gently touched her lip. Turning a kiss, the fairy happily fell into the arms of the boy. She looked like a sieve and satisfied. The rent wondered how the fairy feels. Marie glowed with happiness, and gladly replied that everything was fine with her. The young man thought and realized that he was his first kiss in life. Again the trolley in which several people sits. The young Missa smiles and says that Ren's mother has the best and most special talent. She added that she always felt the guy was destined for a great adventure life. Rent smiled and replied that Guy had told him the same. The young man, meanwhile, slept behind them on the hay. The girl specified that he received the ability of a swordmaster. She called this skill ordinary, and added that the hot hearts of level D happens not so rarely. Misa smiled happily and asked Ranta if they could travel together now. The guy in response too, smiled and agreed, adding that they should create a lot of loud stories. The girl sharply blushed and looked at the rent as quite different. She confessed that she liked it all, and carefully asked if they could be something else together. The Rience was filled with a blush. The girl's proposal was so impressed that he just couldn't say a single word for a few seconds. Only her name escaped from his mouth. The girl made my eyes and asked the boy if he loved her. He began to look embarrassed, and his cheeks were even more powerful. Finally, very shy, he whispered uncertain, "Yes." Misa decided to act the first. She took a deep breath, leaned the sponges and slowly leaning forward. Step by step, her face was getting closer to the lips of the rent, and within a few seconds there was a barely noticeable distance between them. Suddenly, instead of the expected warm lips, the guy felt something cold. Opening his eyes, he realized that instead of a gentle kiss of the girl, he got a kiss from an apple. The rent was clearly dissatisfied with this, which he immediately declared a frightened cry. Misa laughed and immediately began to apologize to the guy for such a stupid trick. The girl smiled gently, once again apologized, and sincerely admitted that she was not ready for a serious relationship. For her, this idea seemed silly, so she just wanted to make a joke. The wren was awakened by the back of the head and said that he had now understood everything. His smile was a little clumsy, because as soon as he was failed. However, he was not offended. He did not see in this sense. Suddenly, the shouts of the guys came from behind. Someone clearly interfered with the duty on the street, and the rent involuntarily paid attention to it. He was a little surprised that he woke up so rapidly, and Miss was just whispering that it was still possible to sleep, because the city was far away. Rent recalled all of it. The pain squeezed the heart. They were once extremely close, but they were betrayed, and they were changed to some bracelets. Now it is set to revenge until the end. The anger, despair, and feeling of loss were completely captured by the guy, forcing him to think only of revenge, and add even more determination to regain all his strength, even with just. If he had not met Meppy, his life could have happened completely differently. He may have remained on the street, under the same rain, and eventually turned into no-one-need garbage, lonely and forgotten by everyone. He carefully covered her small body with a blanket so that she was warm until the morning. When he looked at the fairy, he was a strange feeling. It was not love or even deep affection. He himself could not fully understand what he was feeling for this little but cruel girl. All you have to do is look at her, and his soul becomes warm and quiet. He feels alive again. Its presence brings calm and warms the heart, reminding that it is not alone. He suddenly realizes that he has joy in his soul. Carefully taking the blanket, it is covered with it, and it is quietly whispering a good night of the fairy, which sleeps nearby. Meanwhile, stars are shining brightly in the sky over the city. Adventures begin with a guild. The girl looks at him with a diver's smile and repeats, as she said, "Mr. Rent is now somewhere in this city." The guy categorically denied that he could have been, because he's been wanted for several days. The girl accused him of compassion, saying, "Sorry to hear that." The guy again became angry and began to swear, shouting for whom she had him. Music came closer and said, "Guy, calm down, we definitely don't need even more problems." Sitting at home, Misa thoughtfully tried to understand how much strength was spent by her comrades. The parchment was written, the level of borrowed magic of the detachment, 2,678,078. The girl quietly said that she anticipated it. The girl noted that today, magic became less than yesterday. The guy became angry and shook his opponent, realizing that he continued to steal their magic. Miss looks at the parchment and suddenly realizes that she had not paid attention before. She did not even count how much magical energy they spent. However, despite this, everything seems very strange to her. She explained that the strength of their team, bracelets, and the overall magical potential is restored naturally. But the girl concluded, a decrease in used borrowed magic produces two small results. Guy stood up and asked what she meant. The Missa replied that she did not fully understand what was happening. Elle wondered how much more they would have to swallow these potions. They are very bitter and not cheap. Miss rose from the chair and replied that they should be patient. So far, according to her estimates, if everyone drinks 45 bottles to restore strength, there will be no magic loss at all. They began to be indignant loudly, they say. She no longer want to drink it, and suggested that he himself to be questioned for her. The guy was angry and asked that she was inventing for nonsense. Miss, on the contrary, interested the words of this girl. Adventures begin with a guild. The same middle-aged man, to whom the Heavenly Sword team once turned, sat aside and smoked silently. When he quietly spent his time alone, the mass suddenly shouted to him in a sharp voice. The girl appeared in an extremely outspoken outfit and asked her grandfather whether she recognized her. The man decided that they were from the same detachment, and Miss was glad that he had recognized them. The girl suddenly stood on both sides of him and quietly, in a whisper, said that they really needed his help, that they need it very much. The grandfather was struck by such a head from the girls. It was stunned. He would never think that at first they would drive him out of their team and then return. At the next table, as if away from the whole scene, he was sitting. Dissatisfaction was clearly read on his face. He remembered how Misa built the whole plan at his discretion, and Maria, taking away magic, stole only a certain part. She rarely got up from the table, but this time she suggested that in order to strengthen the command magic, it is worth finding a newcomer with a high rate of magical power. Guy was satisfied with this plan, and believed that it would be possible to reduce the impact on others, and Elle even called the girl a genius. Showing the parchment of the old man they recently visited, they realized that they now needed his help. From now on, he became their goal, and they found him without much difficulty. Misa jokingly demanded the answer, playfully clinging to him even closer. She sincerely believed that her plan was working, and did her best to make it reality. The old man was red and, awkward, tried to lift his eyes. Suddenly, a small group of travelers came behind and turned to an elderly man. He rejoiced when he saw that he finally waited for his team. The guy asked who the girls were standing near, to which the old man replied, "They were nobody. Just wanted to ask something." Misa asked sharply if he was no longer free. The man replied that this was not quite true. Grandpa reported that the whole guild has known for a long time. The team of the Celestial Sword was somehow a strange curse. In his voice, ridicule swelled, and he looked as if he was well aware of what pathetic state this team has dropped now. He apologized and assured that he would not contact such people. For him, it is like taking their curse on himself, and he does not need it. No gossip is beneficial. Miss began to indignate loudly. Elle tried to reassure her. Guy clenched his teeth from anger. "So you never have to humiliate them." They barely believed in their ears and dreamed of smashing something. The guy heard a conversation behind. A girl who was never taken to this team, irony. And look, they say, now they ask, although they have been pushed before. She came to the conclusion that the team should not behave so confidently. The man nearby noted that, apparently, they were angered well and now they called a curse. The girl sighed and confessed that at first they liked her. But the man replied that their era had passed. Both did not worry about the fate of the team, believing that they were guilty of it. The guy came up with the back and asked rudely whether they were talked about. His eyes were burning rage. Every movement and the word were full of readiness to pacify everyone with one blow against the table. Grabbing his man for his clothes, he exploded and shouted loudly, demanding explanations. Why did he suddenly silence and haven't their time come? Elle also hurried to stop him. Suddenly the administrator turned to the detachment, the endless sky of the sword. The girl replied that she had already considered their question, and now knows where Mr. Rent was. Miss and Guy suddenly ran to her and asked sharply where he was. The girl replied that Mr. Rent was serving in Melba. The girl was incredibly surprised to learn that the guy went to the city of the Great Maze. Misa is amazed at how he was so far away, and the guy just opened his mouth and grumbled carelessly that he was indifferent. He sought to find him and crush his own. In his gaze, the rage and a passionate desire to destroy everything that happened, and in his thoughts, he drew a meeting with a guy who would certainly get caught in his eyes. The grove came out of the bushes after his adventure. The fairy was joyfully exclaimed that they managed to find the passage to the 3rd level. Rent notes that the monster becomes much stronger and more dangerous, so he will have to strain even more than usual. Level 3. The Rada Cave. Recommended rank for adventurers, D. Marie said she felt a trap here because the corridors in the room were barely lit and seemed suspicious. The girl suddenly stopped. She liked the gloomy atmosphere of this place. She felt for the first time that it was reminiscent of a real dungeon. The Rent was confused by such a reaction, but suddenly he supported her idea and also began to enjoy this view of the dungeon. He confessed that even his heart was killed faster, and Fairy said he was feeling the same. The protagonist manages to avoid the impact at the last moment. He instantly attacks a dagger and immediately involves simply into the core of the skeleton. Everything happened unexpectedly, but the enemy managed to win. The Rent suggested that the monster that appeared on this floor of the dungeon attack everything that makes sound. Then the fairy voiced one interesting offer. They could communicate with thoughts. The guy was stunned, hearing his voice in his head. Moppy reassured him and told that he was capable of such. He turned to her, and Steam immediately replied that he was hearing perfectly. It surprised the security guard, and he said with a slight indignation that she had to warn about such ability during the trip. The mobby just laughed and apologized for such a surprise. The deeper the team was moving on this floor, the more the carrier rejoiced, as this location was much more enjoyable and cooler than the previous floors. The caves are so confused that the boy needs to be alert all the time not to get a blow from an unexpected place. To avoid the trap, the annuity uses the presence of detection. Considering the results, he noticed a group of adventurers who fought with the monster and decided to look more closely to study it better. In a moment, the protagonist suddenly rushed to run, which caused confusion with his companion, who immediately began to question what had happened. The Rent decided it was a regular visitor. The proposing man did not understand anything, so the guy explained. They were two strong enemies that did not meet the level of complexity of the dungeon. Sometimes it happened that demons from deeper floors accidentally appeared higher. Before that, the monster was heading the guy. Meppy guessed that her master seeks to intervene and help the unhappy. He just apologized for his kindness. But the magic strategic did not worry. She felt that it could benefit. The Rent collided with strangers who appeared from the corner. One of the warriors shouted, "Why are you dreaming here?" The guy immediately began to apologize. While they argued, the magician hurried to push a friend, and the healer joined it and also urged not to stay. The girl responded to their escape, but the warrior insisted, "It is better than to die." The magician just added that luck is probably waiting for them elsewhere. Looking after the strangers, the carrier asked the Rent whether these travelers were victims of attack. The guard was convinced that they were not the same, but they also noticed the offender. He was more concerned that someone was clearly behind. Meppy suggested that someone failed to escape. Then the man quickly moved on, but a dead end was waiting ahead. But looking closer, the guy noticed, "This wall is different from others." It was made of magic material. Touching her, he felt a pleasant warmth. So the obstacle appeared recently. This obstacle was built by a team of adventurers, which the main character came across by accident. Understanding this, the Rent asked his partner to move away, and then created a fireball and destroyed the wall into piles. When the dust was settled, a monster appeared in front of the protagonist. More precisely, a four-handed skeleton. But the guy had not yet had time to be taken like a fairy without spending time, pointed to him on the exhausted warrior. The girl was not going to give up. She shouted it all, boldly urging the monster to rush at her. While the girl fought with another monster, the man persistently advised her not to delay and move faster. She listened to his words and apologized for her miss. The magician used healing magic on the boy. He jokingly noted that he had to wait a long time, but the magician just waved, as if nothing had happened. The team planned to break through today to the 3rd level. The magician was not worried, because the stock of magic was enough for him. The main one, so that the road did not happen to the whole of the monsters. The girl, gathering all her courage, asked to treat her as well. But friends were not going to spend magic on a regular scratch. The other girl did not appreciate the Rin, so she threw a few cold words of support. The warrior asked. The team accused the Rin of the fact that they still remain in the rating D only through it, and asked not to interfere with fighting. The girl apologized again, but her apologies only angered the satellite, because instead of asking for forgiveness, more effort could be made. Suddenly, the guys scared something. The magician and no idea had that he was standing before him, so he assumed with distrust that it was probably a 3rd-level boss. But his friend immediately realized that they were a special, unpredictable creature. The man called the girl, but she was not going to concede. This time she intended to fight to the end so as not to bring her team. He surprisingly agreed with her, and then added that she would have to become really useful again. Rinka, without understanding his words, decided to ask the man what he was in mind. While the girl fought desperately with the monster, she did not immediately notice that her team was already retreating. As soon as the wall appeared, the man hurried to hurry up the comrades. "It's time to run." Rinka barely had time to repel the enemy's strokes. She could not believe that the enemies decided to get her together with the boss. Rejecting the thoughts that she was left, the girl convinced herself she just wins time for them, and therefore, her team will be able to escape. Remembering how the team considered it a weak link, which inhibited their development, Rinka decided to fight to the latter. The warrior was already ready to fight, but her sword could not withstand such powerful blows. Her mind desperately did not want to put up with her death, which was already breathing in her back. At the very last moment, a powerful explosive came, which rolled around the skeleton. The ferryman began to catch the monster and asked if the fireplace liked that. Without hesitation of a second, the guy wondered if everything was fine, and suggested help. But Rinka suddenly noticed some movement and hastily warned the rescuer. The skeleton is still alive. The protagonist realized that this skeleton was not so easy, so he had only one way out. The Rent threw Fairball, stunning the enemy, and noticed the nucleus. Without delaying, he snatched the dagger, because there was no time for the spell. The mobby worried the owner, but he assured her that everything is relatively good. Meanwhile, the monster rushed to the rent, but the guy immediately noticed the weak place of the enemy and was already prepared to strike a decisive blow. The protagonist used the spell Magical Operation and was already prepared to destroy the enemy. The rent launched a fiery ball into a monster, which was 20 times larger than him. The four-handed skeleton could not stand the powerful blow of the protagonist and eventually defeated. In the market, everyone was vividly discussed that a detachment of Melt Rain A should come to the Melba, and heard whether they should go there. Meanwhile, Roger, a member of the Media Lightning team, distributed autographs. A man approached him and suddenly asked to leave the autograph on his shirt, which was very surprised by the traveler. But it turned out that the supporter was going to make this shirt with his charm on future travel, and he willingly agreed to sign it. It was at this moment that Roger was called. Comment, one of the participants of the detachment Meteoric Rain, threatened to the man, "If he does not eat his portion of rice, she will immediately take her away." The adventurer asked to wait a little, promising that he would quickly eat everything. However, the girl did not even think to wait for the dish to cool. The intention, which was in the team of reporters, jokingly said that Roger, as always, was very popular. At this point, Gin, a member of the Meteorite Rain, told his comrades that their team intends to conquer a large maze and asked if the Lord would bless them. The men supported Gina, and someone even relied on their success. But immediately the adventurer denied, "This is not a couple for money." Meanwhile, while the loud chats continued, the fugue from the Meteorite Rain group tasted the tea calmly, watching everyone in silence. But suddenly, a detachment ran out of the maze and excitedly reported trouble. In the large maze on the 3rd floor, there was a strange creature. The man who saw him described him as a skeleton with 4 hands. Roger immediately realized that it was a 4-handed skeleton. The worried girl ran to the adventure seekers, hurriedly asking if all the goals and where they met him. She promised to send a detachment immediately. The 3 assured her that she was safe, but stressed that their friend was in danger. The man explained that the Rin was specifically distracted by him to allow them to escape. The girl couldn't believe her ears. Then she tried to find out whether their companion was still alive. But the man, noticing what the conversation was, sighed heavily and confirmed with sadness. Most likely, she was not among the living. Hearing his doubts, the girl turned sharply to her colleague and asked her to check the maze for signs of life. The colleague did not delay the search, asking the name of the victim. The girl's girlfriends remembered her with sadness, because Rinka never wished anyone evil. It was at this moment that the man received a message. People were happy about the wonderful news. The girl was alive. Someone immediately suggested that you go to her search immediately. The team was not at all happy about this news. They clearly did not expect that she remained alive, because it was they who closed his girlfriend inside. The girl noticed a strange whisper between the participants, but Roger confidently stopped any negotiations. The Meteoric Rain detachment is preparing to destroy the apostate and save the Rin. The girl looked at the group with distrust. Roger explained that they have not been in the maze and can take a little stroll to get used to the maze. The comment has already anticipated fun adventures. People began to whisper among themselves, because the participation of such a strong team inspired the hope of everyone. And suddenly someone exclaimed that help was not needed at all. The Rent dealt with the monster and brought the girl out of the maze. She was completely intact. As soon as they were seen, the Rinka team rushed to her with screams and anxiety. The hero defeated the mold illness, after which only a large magic stone remained on the ground. Then Roger came closer and asked if it was indeed a Rent. The guard greeted with joy with an old acquaintance who had not seen for a long time. The man was immediately interested in who the girl is near the Rent. Rinka replied instead. The guy helped her escape. The passionate exclamations began to be heard around. People acknowledged that the guy was really cool. Then the man in despair rushed to the guard with the question whether he missed them. Jin stopped him and advised him to thank the Rent for his friend's saving. But the protagonist seriously replied that there was no need, because they used the Rin as a bait. The man, shocked, asked again. Numeria asked the bait with suspicion, and the girl recalled that, as her team claimed, she remained in her own will. The warrior shouted, "They say," everything was exactly the way he spoke before, and the words of the keeper, a fiction. The annuity asked the girl to pay attention to a piece of wall created by charms. 3 sorcerers built this wall and cut off the Rin from the exit. If you look closely at the stone, you can determine who exactly the spell was. People began to condemn such behavior, and in despair, the man turned to the girl, hoping that she would confirm. Her team did not lie, and all these accusations were just the fictional inventions of this guy. Adventurers are unpredictable people. They are not sure whether they will survive tomorrow, so they put all the trust only in those who are taken into their team. However, this three knows well what betrayal and abandonment is. Roger believed that this team should not exist at all, but suddenly someone touched him lightly at his shoulder. Talking to the fugue without words, the traveler finally calmed down. The employee asked if they had at least some excuse. The Roger decided not to interfere further in this case and suggested changing the topic, for example, to go hunting. John supported this idea immediately. Then the man asked the rent whether the caretaker would be free the day after tomorrow. The protagonist did not understand what was talking about, but Roger had already said goodbye to him and was about to go. Namer said goodbye to the next meeting, and Jean praised him for a beautifully done business. Suddenly, the comet unceremoniously squeezed him, thinking that the caretaker had enclosed the passage. The fugue silently apologized for the girl's behavior, but the guy did not think to be offended. Looking at them, the mobby noted that they were a rather noisy company. The rent just laughed in response, did not deny. In the end, this was the kind of meteoric rain. The girl named Rink responded, and approached to answer the question of what happened. When the whole procedure was completed, the employee thanked them for their cooperation. All this time, the crystal glowed with blue light. It meant that their words were true. The girl wanted to find out what happened to her former team. They were questioned in another room. For such behavior and for false reporting of the guild, they were threatened with severe prison punishment. In addition, they are forbidden to be adventurers. They are waiting for hard and long work in the mines. Rink tried to understand everything, but in the end only nodded and said she understood. The girl thanked the rent again for the help. The guy wondered what she would do next, but she had no plans. The team broke up by itself. The guard decided to cheer her up and pointed to a huge bag of money they received for the victory over that skeleton. Rent added that it all became possible thanks to her, and in gratitude he wants to at least treat the girl. She tried to give up. The guy confessed that his comrades also left him. Rinka lifted her eyebrows in surprise, and the guard added, "Once they are here, he can listen to her complaints." When they settled in tavern, the girl confessed that the 7th time had broken the relationship with her. The main character was difficult to believe in so many failures. She decided to sincerely admit that her heart was broken not by refusal, but because of something else. Rinka received a gift, the Path of Ashura, which, however, did not allow her to leave the battlefield. The young man was even more surprised not by his power, but how rare and unique. The girl said coldly that it was just words. She considered herself weak because she could not curb her own sword, but this gift still forced her to fight. Her fate is to fight until the last breath. But the guy also suffered because of his gift. The former partners left him as soon as he became unnecessary for them. The guard despised himself for his own powerlessness, but this gift could save him. Its name is an endless magical repository. It is the same unique ability as Rinka's. The girl thought about his words. She dreamed of whether she could once be as confident. Ren suggested that Rinka create a team. She was surprised by such an idea, but he explained that his ability was to support others, so they would make a wonderful team together. The girl remembered all the ridicule, and especially those of the last command words, after which she had to apologize for her refusal. She understood that if she worked with the caretaker, she would only hold him. It is better to act for her. Seeing an unknown creature, the girl was scared and shouted that there were some relics here. Moppy greeted the Rin and called, saying that she was helping Mr. Rent, while the guy came to her senses after an unexpected cry. The girl still couldn't believe that her real fairy, and Meps, meanwhile, apologized that she scared her. At first, only the Keeper of Magic could see it. But because he developed his abilities, she can now appear in front of anyone he chooses. Rinchi could not worry. She would not have to worry for Rent, because she was a real find and a profitable investment for the owner. The Rin was frightened, because it did not understand the content of the words of Mopey. The main character, indignant and puzzled, demanded an explanation what his girlfriend says. But Mopey only calmly assured, it was a compliment. This made the Rin think. If the Rin starts working with this guy, she will really get stronger. And if so, then the Rent will also benefit. Both benefit from it. This is the special gift of the Keeper of Magic, to help to grow to others. The girl asked if she could really become stronger, and the guy confidently assured her that it would be. Seeing the distrust of the Rin, the warden suggested that the scheme test at least one day. Remembering everything Rant had done earlier, The girl decided to trust him. Then he saved her. At least she decided to make every effort. After that, they went to the guild together and approached the administrator. The company registered its unit and gave it the name Deviation. The seller issued 20 healing pores after payment, and then reluctantly turned to the missile, warning it. The action of this potion is such that it seems to borrow magic from the future. But if you resort to it too often, one day it will turn into problems. The sorceress remained dissatisfied with the fact that the seller began to teach her, they say. He almost did not use it. She just smiled, rolled her eyes and went proudly, and her husband realized that he was happening to him constantly. Express led to Melba was already preparing to go. Passengers noticed that at the very end there was a group that everyone knew as a silver wolf with 2 heads. Upon learning that Class B was traveling with them, people immediately felt safe. It was at this time that another team approached them, and Guy asked the Desto and Hastra, who belonged to the detachment of a silver wolf with 2 leaders, changed with them. Lundvd was like a soft place on which they stopped. Miss tirelessly complained about all the inconvenient places that had occurred before. Even the sword did not resist, and began to insist to change everything. Brothers and sister immediately recognized them. It was the Infinite Sky team, which everyone knew as the fastest-growing detachment of ranking in history. Guy immediately recognized the one who was sitting opposite him, and noted that this person was always weaved at the end of the list among the bus B rank. Raleigh, one of the 2-headed silver wolves, no longer wanted to listen to the swordsman's mockery. But Guy did not stop it. Then Destora and Sinistra themselves offered to change places. Although the girls from their team did not understand why they did it, they gave way to a wonderful team. But even then, they had to listen to ridicule. Sirika, which belonged to the elite detachment of 2-headed silver wolves, did not sympathize with this trinity. She herself doubted whether their commander made the right decision. This is an express card. It will deliver you twice as fast as any high-speed omnibus. All because it chooses bold routes where ordinary crews do not even run the risk of going. The one who sits on the very edge of such a wagon, according to the unwritten rule, becomes a guardian of the whole journey. They chose such an important and responsible mission for themselves, without even thinking about it. The Serach was angry with such lightness of this trinity, but Sinistra reassured the girl, assuring that the rank B team could not be so irresponsible. Shannon, who was part of the ranks of a 2-headed silver wolf, wondered and realized that she was feeling some dislike. At this time, the cart was rushing through the spooky forest, and even the guards watching the safety felt a lot of tension. Suddenly, a warning came from the trolley. Someone was prevented loudly by everyone who had been brewing orcs ahead. The monsters have already dealt with the cart. One of the soldiers called for adventure seekers that 3 orcs were waiting for them, and that reinforcement was needed as soon as possible. The wolves had its own important mission. The roles were impoverished by the fighters from another detachment, and Guy never stopped what they want from them. But the brother and his sister made it clear that the moment has come when the guards of the whole trip should prove themselves in all its glory. In this battle, opponents were high orcs. The force of the unit of rank B had to cope with such enemies without much effort. The right monster rushed at the 2-headed wolf, the left was formed under the sword of the endless sky, and the remaining in the middle moved towards the convoy. A thick forest was spread around the adventurers, so they had to deal with enemies as soon as possible, so as not to attract the attention of other monsters. Desto with their team traditionally decided to cope with this lightning. Sirika accelerated her comrades with the help of magic of acceleration, and then the roll strongly rushed to the front attack on the Orca to distract him. The twins of the swords with the blow of the shackles were obedient, and in a moment Shannon released a whirlwind of flames. The wolves coped with the task in 7 seconds. The result is decent, though not record. During this time, the soldiers tried to injure the Orca, and only more angry were more angry. Seeing the feudal warriors trying to defeat them, Destora and Sinister performed a common attack called Silver Scissors and broke the enemy. The soldiers thanked their rescuers, but the rolls were not to their liking. Guy insisted that Elle would take advantage of her magic, but she could not have a spell because she did not drink herbs. But the Missa felt bad after the first bottle. The swordsman reproached his comrades for inaction, and the audience could not understand why this team gathered. The orc was already approaching, and the girls pleaded with the boy somehow to solve the situation. However, he understood that the elixir is likely to not happen on time. The warrior did not drink the potion because he was certain no one will be able to take away his abilities. However, everything turned out to be different. The orc turned out to be stronger. Miss began to doubt everything that was happening, because at their time they were effortlessly dealt with such orcs by whole groups. But the guy was not even going to listen to her complaints. He was only interested in one: to use his strength to the full. The sword needed his magical power. As he delved into his thoughts, the twins had already dealt with the last enemy. The battle finally ended and the path opened. People gladly welcomed the heroes, applauding them just from the windows of their carriages. Brother and sister apologized to the team of Guy for interfering. They explained that they only did their work, protecting the carriage. However, the sword did not consider it necessary. He was convinced that they would have coped with himself. The twins were almost lost patience, so with an ironic smile stated that they were good to believe the words of the warrior. When they left, they both noted, "A good name is a fragile thing." Guy tried to challenge them again, but suddenly fell silent. The pain from the wound became unbearable. Seeing the blood, Sinstra asked Sarek to help heal him. The girl did not want to spend her magic in vain, but eventually agreed. The soldiers no longer doubted. The sword of the illiterate Sky was in the hands of the leaders of the rank of BB. The Rolls realized that all the rumors about these people were true. It is known that some spell deprived them of their ability to use the skills, but if they are so important to their rank, they should be able to fight without them. Sirika sharply attacked the team, because it was necessary to get out of here quickly before new monsters appeared. People were talking lively, discussing the trinity of travelers who stepped on the road. Guy was convinced that without this mark, they would definitely win. Misa accused the main character. The sword mentioned the rent with even greater indignation and contempt. The registration of the new double deviation detachment in Melba is completed. Level F. Participants: Rent and Rinka. In the window of the system, the main character reported that he joined the second detachment. Since the conditions for the development of skills were fulfilled, the ability to borrow magic has increased by the second level. The Rent has mastered a new skill, auto-compensation. Now, if the debtor drops the level of magic too low, this ability automatically feeds it with magical forces. Guardians no longer need to monitor the level of magical power of your comrades during the battle. Rinka thanks the boy for the repair he lent. She applies her to her armor, and the equipment looks like just from the workshop. Rint is happy to be useful, but there are no surprises. The girl could not believe her eyes and looked at the Rent in a question. He explained that after the last battle, her sword broke, so the guy brought the weapon of the skeleton, melted it, and the blacksmith killed a new one for her. It was already paid for everything, so the swordsman had to pick up her own. The girl's aura suddenly changed beyond recognition, and the blacksmith himself felt it. The annuity asked the girl that she was thinking about the sword. Wrinkle was delighted, because now she could cut anything. The swordsman thanked her friend. At that moment, the man was not sure whether it seemed to him, whether it really was. For a second, the blacksmith seemed to her the worst sword in the world. This time the team returned to the big maze of Melba, but already to the second level. The girl decided to tell the keeper again about her abilities. The most useful of them is the so-called self-reinforcement. That is, the ability to fill themselves with magical power and become stronger. As soon as you activate this skill, all your magic is spent until the enemy is defeated before you. After activation, 7 units of energy are consumed at once, and then, one another 10 seconds. The maximum stock in the sword, 10 units. So now she will be able to use this ability within 40 seconds. On the other hand, it should be noted that if the team members of the team would not be exhausted, then her skill would work further without any obstacles. Rent was convinced that with his ability to borrow magic and recently received automatic compensation, it is quite real. But Rinka doubted whether they would be able to do so. Seeing strangers, Goblin felt into the horn, and the Rent, seeking to help the girl, asks her to believe him and try to take a little his magic. From the first blow to the last sword, Rinka cuts and destroys everything in his path. This is the path of Asura. The protagonist activated the skill of automatic compensation. When the level of magic fell below 9 units, the ability of Magic in Debt worked. The girl began to lightly deal with the enemies. One by one, he won them at incredible speed. Watching the trial battle of Rinka, the keeper of magic and no idea that she was really capable of. The swordsman cleverly evaded the arrows, and scratching the tree, skillfully dealt with the attackers. Her gift is a real power, just incredible and powerful. The only downside is to spend too much magic. So it is not surprising that the usual detachment could not reveal its full potential. However, now it can only create 1 unit of magic in 10 seconds. It's just a dream. But over time, her skill will grow, and more magic will be needed. Most likely it is not only in skill or progress, but also in it. The Rink dealt with the giant goblin instantly, 1 lightning blow to her sword. The Rent could not believe her eyes. The girl dealt with all the goblins in minutes, striking his cold-blooded skill. Being in a semi-conscious state, the sword suddenly attacked the protagonist. However, gradually she came to her senses and finally recognized the boy. It was a Rin. Since the girl did not enjoy this skill for so long, she was tired of exhaustion, fell and apologized before the Ren for her weakness. The guy noticed that the woman with the sword was standing too close. Realizing this, she immediately retreated and hurried to apologize. Mappy, watching all this, sighed, laughing at his comrades. The guild calculated how many materials brought together by the Rin's team collected. 1,043 goblin magical stones were estimated at 104,300 gold. 18 magical stones of goblin leader cost 9,000 gold. Goblin seeds obtained after the destruction of the colony, 18 pieces, and their cost is 36,000 gold. When guild gave the reward, Rinka, barely holding back the delight, turned to the keeper. Today, her maximum magic stock grew by 4 units at once. The protagonist greeted her, and the girl confessed that in the last 3 years, only 2 artifacts were able to obtain. Therefore, the swordsman is grateful for the opportunity to rent 1 more. The guy only helped her a little, and Rinka did the whole major business. She confessed that she could not believe everything that has happened. However, the Keeper of Magic saw everything with his own eyes, and in his opinion, it was simply incredible. The girl who so desperately fought was truly unsurpassed. She has something to be proud of. She was sincerely moved by these words. At that moment, their conversation was interrupted by a fairy. Mobby approached to tell them about today's loan for Mrs. Rinka. Since the skill is activated once, it took 126 units in total. It took 1 hour and 21 minutes. 1 unit is spent every 40 seconds, so 490 came out. After careful calculations, Steam received 616 units. The swordsman agreed with this result. Rinka promised to become stronger and be sure to thank for help. But the fairy immediately started talking about interest and debt. Looking at them, Rint wondered when he was last thanked for his help. And here the caretaker remembered how in the first days his former friends really appreciated his support. The protagonist decided not to repeat the mistakes of the past. This time they will become stronger together. The girls interrupted the boy's thoughts, suggested to celebrate the creation of a detachment with a delicious dinner. Adventure seekers overcame the dragon and passed through the Grand Mail Maze, which was located on the 8th floor of the Dragon Mountain. The Gene was upset because the scales turned out to be too strong, and they were a real challenge. Then Fugus recalled that at the request it is necessary to get as many as 30 pieces. The warrior and no idea had that it would be even more difficult to collect the scales than to defeat the dragon himself. Then he looked at the girls. They should also help. But Nymeria did not think to take a difficult cause, and the comet completely refused to work as a simple worker. Roger got out of the dragon, holding his liver in his hands, exactly what was needed for Jin. The warrior strictly quarreled Roger for his negligence, and he immediately began to apologize, not even noticing how strange worms crawled behind his back. A parasite was hiding inside the dragon who grabbed his intention and comet. The girls only thought about one thing, to get rid of, and they required it to be silent. At this point some, as if nothing happened, still continued to collect scales. The protagonist invited the girl for dinner to admire the meteoric rain together. She categorically refused, because she considered herself a simple, unintelligible experience of adventure. Then Rinka wondered where he knew them. It turned out that the passing team of rings became quite noticeable, so they drank more than once. The sword wished the boy a good evening. When he came to the bar, Ren mentioned that he had not drank with the Roger for a long time, and although he was waiting for this meeting, he was still worried. Suddenly, the girl apologized to the bartender for late. The Rent was surprised that the number was wearing a dress, because today, their team went to the task. Magina explained with a smile, meeting with him is already a special reason to get involved. She asked how her outfit was. The Rent was embarrassed that she looks great. Roger cut the numeri of the Ficker for the fact that she dared to embrace the guard. The warrior also questioned that it was for ugly clothes, and when the girl had time to dress him. The girl in response only complained that she was hurting in it, and Roger simply did not understand in beauty, because the landlord likes this suit. When they sat down, the warrior confessed that he had heard a lot of rumors about the guy's detachment, and then asked the caretaker directly why they were expelled. Roger sympathized with Rank, and to cheer him up, he suggested that he drink together to forget about all the troubles a little. But the protagonist apologized, explaining that now is not the best moment for alcohol. Mary considered this story terrible. How can you just get rid of a friend who spent 5 years? Roger has only added that only bad news has been heard recently. It turns out that everything was held on a renta alone. The guy has a unique ability to accumulate magic, although it seems that his former team has already forgotten how much he has put on him. It was this group that fastest rose to the B rank. Because of this, Roger considered them too self-love. Now that the brand wondered, it seemed to him that he had clung to them. During their adventures, the Barragan calmly gave him his magic, and the guy himself did not even think about how to find his own way. The main character really deserved the deduction. Then he acted very recklessly and did not see his own nose. Suddenly, Roger realized that the rent had already grown up, and it was a great surprise. The girl believed that their leader sometimes behaved more childishly than the keeper himself. This remark offended a man. Nemuria told the ranks about a clash with a dragon. She noted that these creatures appear only at the 8th level of the Great Maze, where it recently raged the Downhow. And according to Roger, these lizards sometimes arrange a lot of annoyances. Subsequently, the girl decided to share with the protagonist the story of the dragon's parasites. Although the man tried to stop it, he could not interfere with it. Rent realizes that it will never reach the level of Roger or Nummy. These guys are truly outstanding. But nevertheless, they tell about their adventures as if they were all old friends, equal. The protagonist dreams of becoming an adventure seeker, as bright and unforgettable as star rain in the sky. Roger reported that his team was going to go through the entire 8th level. Once he voiced it, the guard immediately realized what was being said, and the man only confirmed his guess. The detachment went to conquer the huge maze of the Melba to get to its bottom. The deepest level is the car. It is the many desperate adventurers. Roger asked the girl how many levels exactly the maze has, but unfortunately, there was no exact information. Then the man suggested that he try to get to the very bottom of the maze and see his own eyes. At this point, Ren mentioned that he has important news. The guy boasted that he created a new detachment with the Rin. Both had a special gift that had already had the hassle. Naomiori liked the name of the team, and Roger wondered what this new detachment would look like. Now Roger and Rent have become rivals. When they were already leaving, the guy thanked the Roger for the treat, and he suggested that you join efforts and work together. Namer reproached the man for not opening the true reasons for their meeting. But Roger could not invite the guy to join their group because the keeper had already collected his own team. Roger once had a friend. He made a living, giving money under interest, and did not trust anyone but himself. So he made considerable capital, but in the whole city there were enough those who hated him fiercely. After all, someone killed him. The rent also like a talent. Depending on the circumstances, there was always someone ready to borrow more than usual. He could easily be mistaken, and Roger was afraid that it would happen soon, but the man was convinced that everything would be fine with the caretaker. He was very fond of finding out what his companion thinks now, but it was no longer nearby. Nummy suggested that the main character continue the conversation at the bar, but the guy hesitated, because he was afraid to return late and excite the Rin. The girl was interested in asking them, but Rente assured that they were only friends with Rin. The man reassured his intention, as it was for the first time. While they argued, the caretaker remembered that he wanted to ask them for one service. As Meppy envisaged, they have been living in Melby for 3 weeks, and during this time they learned everything they need about the dead. The Central Information Bureau here works perfectly. The guild is served with a delicious roast on skewers. It is a juicy meat that was mixed, fried, and covered with crispy dough. The Rin is delighted with this dish. This soup is considered a business card by Guild Melba. After applying its technique, the sword is always hungry, so he loves to eat. The fairy said that to grow the body, you need to eat a lot. Immediately afterwards, Meppy reminded the girl that she needed to show some of the Lord of Rent. The level of Rin rose from F to E in just 4 days, which was very satisfied with the keeper. In addition, the magic of the girl has increased to 24 units. For a long time, the sword could not accept her gift, and even had anger at him. But now she is confident and dreams of becoming a real experience of adventure. All thanks to the main hero. Until recently, the Rent treated his gift in the same way. But the fairy decided to make a small gift for the Rin. Moppy reached out to her something delicious, a crunchy crust. At first the swordfish treated it with distrust, but as soon as she tasted, all her doubts were dispelled. The fact that the grove arranged was stunned by the Rin, but the war was only interested in the Rent that they had not seen for a long time. The guard without emotions asked what Guy needed, because their roads have long gone. These words ignited the soldier rage. The Trinity began real problems when the guy began to steal their magic. Miss immediately dumped everything on the rent, and the main character immediately corrected her. After all, he did not steal magic at all, just as he did not give it. He just gave it a debt. Friends did not want to think about giving up magic themselves, so the guard of the Charles had to force them to do it. But the magician noticed a girl with a sword, and the dead rushed to find out who she was. Rinka was introduced as an adventure finder who works for hiring. Miss did not immediately believe the girl's words about the boy. The team began to laugh at a former friend, but the sword was defense. Missy did not like the girl's look, so she made her lower her eyes. The rent asked to stop it, but then Guy decided to go to actions. Suddenly, Roger approached them and stated that if you are going to find out the relationship, do it outside. The warrior decided to find out what this man was doing here, but Roger did not even pay attention to his question. He was more interested in the food that fell on the floor. Guy attracted the attention of the man, accusing the rent of magic, because the boy was kicked out of the team. Roger repeated the same words that the caretaker said before. Misa was indignant. How does a man do it without even asking their consent? Then the man turned to the rent, and he confirmed, but noted that they behaved too sharply. The Roger listened to both sides and agreed that too high fee is also a problem, so he suggested his solution. If the parties cannot agree, they can find out who is right in the duel. The man was free, so he announced to become a second. Rinka did not quite understand what that means. Then the caretaker explained that it is an ancient custom when two arguments solve a dispute in a duel. The young man was pleased with this opportunity, because in the event of victory, the landlord would have to return all the magic he stole. The guy accepted any conditions of the competition, even if he had to fight himself against 3 opponents. At that moment, Roger and the main character remembered the conversation that took place the day before. The security guard asked the man to become a second duel. His former detachment comrades were to become enemies. Roger worried that this guy sought to meet them alone. Guy with others will get the Melba before dawn. They will learn about the rent and begin to untangle this story to the end. Then it will be about duel. They will not want to listen to the guy. But if the Roger intervenes, their opinion will change. The man was interested in it, and he asked where the protagonist knew so accurately when they came. The Riance did not admit the fairy. He lied that it was a common anticipation. The organizer reported that Roger would witness, and added that a fascinating show was waiting for us. The Missu was a little tense by a large number of viewers around. Guy, on the contrary, confidently stated that it was the perfect place for the duel, and promised to demonstrate to everyone what they were capable of. The guy enthusiastically watched Roger was able to attract people. At that moment, Jin wished him good luck, and the goalkeeper felt his sincere gratitude for such support. Jean spent all his weekly money on rent, so he just couldn't lose. The man gets in a couple again. The organizer appealed to Mr. Renty and respectful participants from the Order of the Infinite Sky, with a request to announce their rates on a future match. The guy on behalf of the whole team stated that if they defeat, the keeper will immediately stop taking away magical power. Now the turn of the hero. If the anniversary wins it, it will increase the interest rate on magical e-collects. It is now 8% for 10 days, and it will be as much as 10%. The magic power loan will be paid on a monthly basis. From tomorrow, the guy will receive another 90,000 magical power. 10% per annum will still be added to this amount, but the seller did not even have time to name the final price. Miss Jess decided to clarify everything at once. The protagonist was charged with interest daily. These payments were binding on everyone. Not wanting to delay more, the warrior strongly made it silent, clearly making it clear that death was already nearby. The organizer invited the boys to lay the oath. They swore honestly to accept any result of this holy duel. Roger also joined the oath as a second. The Rin looked alarmed. It seems for the first time she witnessed something like that. The oath given during a duel is unbreakable. It's a lot more than just a promise. It will have to answer for her violation. The consequences will be extremely serious. Although the girls have never met live, everyone knew well who was standing in front of her now. Intention was told of yesterday, which she spent with Rinto. She decided to decorate the events a little to joke with the girl. Rinka did not understand the joke at all, and it was quite comforted in tension. But in the end, Rinka decided to trust the boy, because she was sure he would certainly win. The swordsman nodded in agreement. Suddenly, a fairy appeared in front of them, who clearly wanted to say something. Mr. Rint never loses. The girl was struck by these confident words, But it was then that Roger announced the duel. The audience kept their breath, waiting for the beginning of the duel. The hero goes into the arena and takes a position opposite the man in the armor with a giant sword. There are two girls behind that, a black-haired and blonde. A dark-haired girl and a guy open small bottles and take a sip of them. People do not understand why they drink a recovery potion when the battle just started. A girl with white hair named Elle also begins to drink after others. Her comrades are watching her concerned. Overcoming everything to the last drop and breathing hard, Elle states loudly that if they manage to defeat the hero, she is ready to wear anything. The hero casts everyone with his eyes and states that he waits for them to get drunk. The armored guy immediately accuses him of mocking. The hero notes that these people still rely on magic. The guy remembers how he had ended magic once. He was forced to drink a potion. He was poured into his mouth to restore magical forces for further grueling procedures. With bitterness, almost through his teeth, he swears, because it was an extremely unpleasant feeling. The thoughtful guy does not notice how the knight is rapidly attacking, making the sword. Only the unexpected cry of one of the audience breaks out of thought. The hostile blow falls in the place where the guy stands, and a powerful wave explodes immediately. The fragments are flying all the way, and there is a noticeable something like a pig peel among the debris. The witnesses of the event fly back under the pressure of the explosion. The girl with anxiety exclaims the name of the rent. After the attack in the air, dust clubs are lifted, and the pig falls hard on the floor. A girl named Knight is watching what is happening and calls the name of the rent. The man who bet on the boy is approached by others and promised to return everything with percentages. Knight smiles happy, as if he already knows the result. The knight is proud of having won the guy with one blow. The dark-haired girl turns to the boy, calling him a boy, and notes that he is overdue it. He smiles and adds that the protection of a blonde girl named Elle also worked great. One guy looks back to Roger and says they are just incredible. But the rogue is just frowned in response, and the evening cannot understand what happened to this guy. Something with a pig is clearly wrong. A fiery ball suddenly flashes behind in night darkness. A girl with dark hair yells to him to look around. It has time to call a magical shield and protects them both. They try to understand where this unexpected attack came from. One girl from the crowd says that, as long as Roger is here, no one thinks of interfering with the duel. The girl with the boy rotates and notices a mysterious silhouette in the cloud. They realize that it was Ren's attack, and the girl directed a fiery tornado on him. The hero cleverly evades and emerges from the smoke with a short dagger in his hand. It quickly neutralizes the witch, and it falls to the ground. In the silence of the night, her name is heard. Someone is desperately calling the Missu. The rent raises the pig. The guy yells Ellie so that she helps the witch to get up, but there is no time at all. And it is at this point that he throws 3 fiery balls into the blonde girl. Viewers of the duel are delighted. They cannot believe that the Ren was managed to use 3 spells at the same time and such complexity. The same girl, who was fond of him, now calls for everyone to follow the hero. The guy nearby is surprised. How did he succeed? Squeezing his teeth, Guy realizes that he is not in the best shape now. The knight is surprised as the rent remained intact after his attack. The guy approaches them, holding a pig in one hand and a dagger in the other. The girl from the crowd on whose head was a fairy enthusiastically says that renting is simply incredible and is interested in whether an endless magical hiding place helped here. The fairy replies that everything is due to hard work. She recalls how in the evenings he was sitting in the room with the boy and looking at the products offered. They were glad that finally managed to raise the required amount. Now the rent is carefully choosing what to buy for this money. He acquired the ability to protect the creditor, which immediately began to act constantly. The guy is convinced that the result of the duel was decided in advance. He realizes that mastering this skill has taken a long time, but I am sure that it will be useful to him again. Rent explains that even if the enemy attacks, he will be able to protect himself through this skill. Already in the swing of the battle, he thinks, this effect neutralizes the blows of the enemy if their force does not exceed a certain threshold. He also suggests that the amount of damage depends on how much the debtor has paid. In response, the guy strikes a vacuum push. The sword touches the guy, but does not harm him at all. The rent calmly looks at the blade near his shoulder, surprises that the sword is made of mithril, but crumbles into pieces. The guy smiles and jokes whether the knight looked after his weapon. The fairy says that the attackers are guilty of millions, so they do not even collect them. At this time, the guy notes, now the main thing is to restore strength, and even the money is not enough for the repair liquid. With one movement, the guy breaks the knight's sword. Some from the crowd notice that the fragment of the blade is flying in their direction. However, the fragment is intercepted by an unknown knight with a hidden face and long white hair. He looks at this subject and thinks, will he be able to sell it? The guy with trembling hands squeezes the fragments of his weapon, looks at the crippled comrades and explodes rage. He again rushes to the attack, shouting loudly that he does not lose the rent. And at that moment another powerful wave explodes. The guy skillfully reflects the blow, and the opponent falls to the ground. The audience exclaims that we have a winner and are surprised by steep rent. A girl who sincerely cheered for him cannot believe her eyes. The guy lies on his back, groans with pain, and notices how a hero with a horrible face expression is approaching him, strictly looking from above. Rent orders him to forget about magic. The knight is trying to say something, barely audible, who has already spent all his strength. But the hero does not even listen, he just beats him in his face. The girl with the fairy, along with her girlfriend, carefully watch what is happening. At this time, the Rent sharply breaks Guy and says that it is already life, instilling a dagger on it. He lifts a weapon to the face of the knight and says loudly that he has 3 souls now. A man also thinks about how much they can cost and whether this amount is enough to pay with debts. The Rent threatens him. If it happens, Guy's soul will escape from a circle of rebirth and will be lost in an eternal cold darkness forever. Smiling a creepy smile, Guy only throws, now it's no longer his trouble. The frightened knight tries to stop it. The Grove looks at him, does not recognize and asks who he is. A bloody smile appears on the Rent's face, and he laughs quietly. In the vision of the Wren, he puts another coin on the piggy bank. He lifts it to the face and shakes. The pig notices that a lot has already been gathered and is interested in whether it is enough. The hero replies that no, he needs even more. He shows Pigs how his former comrades share money between themselves, and adds that they now have everything. He rushes to bags with coins. His eyes are crazy and shouts to give him everything, because it is his prey. Someone tries to call him, but he is so passionate about the money and drives the abusers that he does not even hear the call. He is pulled out of the numbness of the girl with a ponytail, who genuinely roots for him. She runs up and hugs him from behind, shouting the name of the hero loudly. The guy suddenly realizes that around the real battlefield, and the Rin hugs him, squeezing firmly. She does not let go, gently whispering to calm down, because he victory for him. The Rent is freezing, gradually understanding what happened. He looks at the rivals that are unconscious. The Roger loudly announces the completion of the duel and proclaims the Rent to the winner. The guy stunned looks around, without believing that he really won. Roger approaches the boy, enthusiastically noting that it was an impressive sight. Having looked at the fallen rivals, he notes how cruel this battle was, and adds that he considered the hero more cautious in his actions. A girl in a white dress with long black hair confesses that she even had ants running through her skin. The Rent looks at her in confusion and says honestly that she does not remember anything at all. At this point, other friends approach him and enthusiastically note how cool everything was. They say that he was a real demon, and at the end of the duel he released from 12 fiery balls. The guy is surprised to ask if he really did. The angry Roger Ashur assures everyone that the enemies remain alive, but the guild representatives are sure to understand them. The black girl notes that the guy could quickly stop the fight, because through her, the Rin burst into tears. Roger reminds him that he hates the most, watching how they behave with the vanquished. A man cannot tolerate people who so cruelly betray their recently loved ones, and then say they deserved it. It is reported that he lost his memory because he was so angry so much that he could not restrain himself. The guy only frowns at them. The bitter memories of the difficult times he experienced with his former comrades suddenly return to Ren. He begins to think that it may have happened. At this point, a girl with short hair, which has already helped him, suddenly attacks behind. The guy is scared. He recognizes a comet in it. The girl asks to teach her to create the same fiery balls. The young man replies that this is only possible with his gift. However, she exclaims that there is nothing impossible for her. Roger removes the girl from the hero's back and advises her to calm down a little, because he has enough trouble. They again turn out to their opponents, who are being treated right now. Meanwhile, a woman with a bucket approaches them. The wounded are trying to get up, but they are poured into a liquid from a bucket. Guy yells that bakes. The woman replies that it is a potion for wound healing, however, it is dirty and full of impurities. He is offended that the wounded should be careful, A woman with disgust throws, "He is just a loaf in the ass. That is why they save them." Girls and a guy look at her with unconcealed pleasure. It is at this moment that the landlord approaches them. They return to the guy standing with the piggy bank in their hands, and in fear they retreat. And he confidently states, "Victory for him." The man says that according to the agreement raises the rate by 10%. Opponents are outraged loudly, assuring that they will not pay a penny more than they have spent. But suddenly, they are permeated by the electrical discharge, and they begin to suffocate from burning pain. Observers claim that the oath given during a duel is still, otherwise it can cost life. Guy, with a blurred look, looks at the rent and quietly says that he understood everything. Guy does not cease to repeat that he understood everything. The Riance cautiously holds the piggy bank in his hands and says the spell to continue the contract. At this time, a mysterious glow appears on his opponent. A label appears on his neck. The guy says the 7th month will soon come, and then he will be able to return the 90,000 he borrowed. But it adds immediately, "This amount is not enough." Then the rent summarizes. They only have 9 days to return 153,139 units with interest. The hero looks at people who barely translate their breath and says that even if all three will restore magic with bracelets, there will still be a shortage. Another 38,000 is required. L complains that they have almost no money left. Guy is indignant even more. When he goes, the rent says with confidence that they will have to drink about 77 bottles. The knight emphasizes that elixirs on the trees do not grow. Misa asks what will happen if they do not cope. Rent coolly says that in this case everything will end for them. He adds that he has no right to give them advice, because they are debtors, and are no longer able to damage him, the creditor. The young man realizes that all this is due to his ability. Gaia, having clapped his teeth, finally realizes why the hero did not shudder at her attacks. In the eyes of all rents, states that in the next 10 days the heroes should do everything for him to repay the debt. In response, they are silent. Rivals look at the guy, stating that this is far from the end. The hero, together with his friends, celebrates the victory in the cheerful tavern, hears the bell of the mugs. The man who put on the hero's victory thanks him, for he became rich. However, the guy answers gratitude with a touch of doubt. They say, "Interesting, what if he lost?" At that moment, a group approaches the guy to greet him. It is a famous detachment called 2-2 Silver Wolf, behind which is a guy with white hair and a girl in armor. The girl politely welcomes the hero. The guy confesses that he had no idea that they were in Melba. They explain that they came here with the task. The girl adds that she was traveling in the same carriage as his duelists. The guy says these refused, as rumors were rumored. The girl adds that they are also impolite. They are indignant. Have never seen Class B adventurers who are fighting with orcs so bad. 2 girls from their company are interested in whether he won, and admit that they want to see his triumph. The man jokingly states that tonight, the main star is the rent, and therefore he must make a speech of the winner. The guy is embarrassed and does not know where to go from shame. He begins to tell how he was expelled from the previous detachment, but fate gave him devoted friends, and so he was able to start everything from scratch as an adventure seeker. Everyone listened carefully to his speech. The man bowed, and Sheely expressed his hope that they would support him and come up with understanding. Silence falls for a moment, and in a moment a wave of votes rises around. Everyone encourages him. They say not to be afraid of their opponents, and hope that they will now become friends. Roger tells a black girl that this guy is funny. She in response points out that it is very similar to him. The Rin and the hero are talking to their eyes, and the girl smiles gently. Rent and Rinka sit separately at the table, and the girl thanks the boy for everything. The fairy, smiling, says that she did not believe in his victory. She had no doubt for a moment. The fairy believes that after such defeat, the enemy will no longer dare because of pride. The guy also hopes for it. Rinka says the guy was well-to-do, but confesses that she was a little scared. Rent apologizes. She recalls the moment he said he had lost his memory. And the guy adds, he was told that he was so angry that he just went crazy. For a moment, the Rent is seriously serious, and confesses that he is not sure of the truth of this. In memory, there is a feeling that is not at all like anger. He remembers his piggy bank. The guy said it was like another eye inside him, full of malice and hatred. The girl is very surprised by this assumption, and the fairy is just smiling. Meanwhile, it is already dark on the street. The Rin is desperately reflected in bloodthirsty monsters, skillfully wrapping the sword. The Rent runs to her and grabs her enthusiastically. The girl turns to him and with a smile notes that it is not everything. She feels as he became stronger. At that moment, a shot sounds inside, and the girl opens her eyes from shock. The girl collapses, a horrific monster that looks like a human skeleton with 4 hands. When she falls, the guy with anxiety exclaims her name. The guy sits in his bed in the middle of the night and remembers everything that happened. The fairy is interested in what happened to him. He replies that his head suddenly returned to his head. She suggests that it was a rage attack. Rint also recalls how Rinka defeated the crowd of Goblin and fought as if he had lost his common sense. The guy believes that their unusual abilities can be extremely dangerous. The fairy reassures him, they say, there is nothing to worry about. It all depends on how to use them. In addition, they can always count on its support. The girl also notices how frightened he looks. He denies his fear. A short controversy breaks between them. But suddenly they are silent, hearing the knock on the door. The guy opens the door and sees on the threshold of the Rin in a shot black suit. She apologizes for a late visit. They sit together on his bed, and she confesses that she is haunted by nightmares every night. The girl confesses that she feels better than every day. Rinka shudders, remembering the day when the skeleton has broken her sword. This moment does not come from her memory. The guy replies that he coped with his fears during the duel in his own way. He adds that the behavior of former comrades immediately became clear. They do not want to return magic at all. Rent is convinced that in 10 days everything will be over. So now it is time to help Rincy overcome her fear. He assures that this girl will definitely defeat this skeleton. Finally it comes that day and they go city. Rinka notices flower beds and says enthusiastically what they are good. Near her stands a cat girl and tells that Melba is a city where people from all over the world come, and in which you can find seeds of a variety of flowers. The girl recognizes these flowers. This is a gramolata and a Melb morning glory. Rinka notes that some flowers blossom in the morning and others in the evening, so they distribute flower beds with the girl depending on the time when the plants bloom. The passionate girl asks how she managed to understand it and where she is so well aware. At this point, the protagonist, dressed in new clothes, turns to the Rin, warmly welcome and apologizes for late. On his shoulder hangs a strap with an attached piggy bank. He asks the girl if she needs a new armor. She in response says she has already tested many options, but this equipment for her is the most convenient. The hero only nods with understanding. Suddenly, a little girl runs to them and asks if they are looking for armor. The characters agree a little. The girl immediately notices katana hanging in the Rin on his side. The girl thinks whether she really samurai, and then quickly grabs her hand and pulls her sideways, insisting that they need to go to their store immediately. The child pulls the Rin behind himself, exclaiming that there are all the products that are perfect for her. The Fee smiles and mentally notes that the Souza is always so energetic. They find themselves inside the Yaga store. There are many amazing things around. The hero is surprised to confess that he has never seen anything like that. The girl gladly welcomes them again. The child tells that this store sells goods from the Far East, but does not have time to arrange as a hero. Considering a vase, completes her phrase instead. Rinka tries the samurai helmet. The girl is interested in her impressions. Well, how do you? The child notes that this helmet once belonged to the shogun himself, the highest among the samurai. The girl awkwardly points out that the helmet is too heavy, shakes uncertainly from side to side, and suddenly part of the helmet beats on the statuette of Tanuki. The shock girl looks at the spoiled thing, and Rinka apologizes. Susie smiles and assures that everything is fine. They have another one. However, the guy looks with distrust that he does not quite believe in these words. The girl extends the vessel, praising it and convincing that on the battlefield this object is able to deprive the enemy thirst for battle. In addition, it demonstrates special donuts. Eat it, and you immediately become quiet and humble. The guy looks at this product with horror. He says uncertainly that it is time to go, but Susie suddenly grabs him for his waist. The girl states that they will not let them go without purchase. She stretches the mask and assures that with her at the party he will dance the best. The guy exclaims the Rincy to escape. The girl is delighted to look at the beautiful cloak that hangs on the wall. The rent is calling her again. She examines patterns with flowers, and someone nearby explains that it is kimono. A man comes out of the back room and notes that it is a hub, and painted by hand. Going, he adds that the fabric seems thin, but it is worth passing through it magic, and it will become strong armor. The girl cannot tear the passionate look from the amazing product. The man welcomes the heroes, and, with a smile, notes that they have not seen visitors for a long time. The girl proudly says she brought them. He sighs reproachfully. Like, again, the forceful of the guests. The child only shrugs. At least I do something. The seller then refers to the rin. He draws attention to the katana of the girl and is wondering if she is samuraika. Rinka shakes his head. Then the guy asks who these samurai are. The man tells that these are warriors from the Far East who fight in the melee, skillfully cutting enemies with their kanis. He notices that their equipment is kimono and confesses, once in love with his beauty, he brought him here. Rinka suggests that they may be similar to their combat styles. The annuity is interested in the girl whether she will fit this equipment. She nods and immediately asks how much it costs. The man calmly replies that it costs 2.5 million. The girl cannot believe her ears. The sum shocks her. The judgment is outraged that it is because of this that he does not buy anything from them. The man in response says, if it was not such a rare thing, he would have reduced the price for a long time. Rinka notes that they are still not affordable. Recent is surprised to ask if this armor really costs. The man confidently replies that it is the best canvas that can only be found and he is hand in for its quality. The guy puts a huge bag with money on the counter and states it. A stunned girl exclaims his name. The hero firmly decides. The rin will wear the best armor, and it is quite justified cost. The girl tries to deny, but he just smiles and says that if they can always earn money in the dungeon, and also notices how hard she looked at kimono. He assured that he fell in love with her at first sight. The rin was terribly discounted and began to whimper something in response. The child shouts loudly that he gives him a mask, because he is the most important buyer. The man calls the market behind himself, and they move further into the store. They find themselves in the backyard where the girl hands a wooden sword. The man confesses that he has not received such assignments for a long time, and offers to train with her in a duel. So it will be easier for him to fit kimono, taking into account her movements and needs. Rent is interested in the girl whether her father is really strong. She agrees and adds that at least combat duels are pleased. The guy thinks if everything would be fine, because earlier the girl had to fight only with monsters. A man thinks that a fight with a person can be a good motivation for the rin. He accepts the fighting rack. The battle begins. They take their seats, and the man announces that everything begins. Susa rents closely monitor tensely. Meanwhile, the man is the first to attack the rin. He targets her shoulder, but she cleverly evades the attack. She causes a blow and the man has time to repel it. The guy with the child is watching the fight, holding his breath. They do not stop attacking one by time. Rent notes that the girl's father is really strong. She also notes that the rin is beating well. After another blow, the man turns to the girl. Do not hold back himself. Show what he is really capable. She attacks continuously, causing strokes once after, and the man barely has time to repel each of them. The man believes that she is already quite fast, although she has not yet revealed all her opportunities. He lifts the sword, preparing for the next step. The seller causes a powerful blow, but the girl has time to gather and skillfully reflects him. The tremor runs through her body, and suddenly she realizes that now the battle is becoming truly dangerous. Her gaze and mood change in her eyes, and her husband immediately notices. She goes on the offensive, acting confidently and exactly with every blow. The Rience immediately felt unwell and excitedly squeezed. The girl did not understand what happened. The Rin with the excitement rushes to the man, causing a powerful blow, and he just smiles mysteriously in response. The man confidently reflects the blow, and one powerful movement knocks the sword out of the girl's hands. Her katana flies over her head and falls hard to the ground. She looks at her opponent with surprise. The guy and Souza are surprised to watch what is happening. Rinka has not yet fully realized what had happened. The seller apologizes to her for her rudeness. The man, barely breathing, confesses. If they continued a little, the battle could end in death. Rinka apologizes, but the owner of the store just smiles and says not to worry. The battle was really exciting. He is wondering what she has. The girl replies, "The Path of Ashura." The man immediately recognizes this style, which is named after a powerful deity. A man is presented as a Jagulindo, a heir to the 21st generation, and is interested in her name. She politely calls herself. The seller says that when considering everything, she has the perfect product for her. She thanks him, and together they return to the house. There they open a whole variety of fabrics. The man asks what patterns she likes, and she, admiring, replies that she likes flowers the most. She is wondering if he has a floral pattern fabric, but to keep the picture not too tender or feminine. The man thinks, and then gets a fabric with a bright red flame ornament and explains, In the language of flowers, such a pattern symbolizes courage. Removing the measures from the girl, Susus notes that she is very strong. Even her father has not made so much effort for a long time. The girl, looking at him, notes that he looks like a master of fencing, and asks whether he was once a real sword master. Susus only smiles at this and says it is just a passion for him. She says that in his youth, this man became a student of a master who sewed kimono and was trained in dozo together with the warriors for whom he created clothes. It was there that he gained his unsurpassed skill. Susan notes that his gift is the magic of fire, and the man adds that she will be very needed to ignite many. The girl listens carefully to their conversation. The child also reports that he has been remained of the age of majority for 5 years. Sus was curious about what a gift she would get, and confessed that she would like to get something related to trade. The guy and Rinka are slowly walking in a lively city street. Rant assures, a little more, and everything will be ready. There is only one day. The girl does not hide her excitement and impatience, but the hero turns to her. He asks whether she likes flowers, because she noticed how she reacted especially when she chose the fabrics, and often talks with others about flower beds. She dreams with a smile that she dreamed of becoming a florist as a child. The guy looks at her with a sincere surprise. The girl tells that in her hometown there was a wonderful flower shop, and bright bouquets have always lifted her mood. She dreamed of giving buyers joy and admiration for the beauty of flowers. She regretting how she had to give up her dream during the age of majority. Rinka understands that you do not always get exactly the gifts you dream of. But even if her gift was different, she could follow her dream, if not that voice inside. She says he feels a voice that convinces her inside. We need to defeat the enemy and fight. The girl tries not to pay attention to it, but the voice does not deviate, and the head begins to ache. The guy looks at the girl with regret. She notices that her gift has brought her not only suffering, but also joy. She confessed that she learned from the series that once rented. The girl confesses that she is scared to meet her ancient enemy, but she understands that it is time to act. She will not run away. She confidently states that she is her fate and she has to follow her heart call. The Riant is just smiling, supporting her words. The guy states that he is a real lender and will follow her at least to the edge of the world until she returns the debt. At this moment, in one of the taverns, 2 men suddenly see how a large bag with money is mowing before them. It is Gas who hires mercenaries. He immediately gives them 100,000 gold, promising 10 million more rewards later. One of the men is wondering who should be removed. Misa was standing behind in the dark, loudly calls Rento and laughs at him. They say, he is a real fool with an old beaten piggy bank on his belt. The man recognizes this name, and asks whether he accidentally quarreled 3 B-class adventurers a few days ago, and asks to remind who it was. He is reminded that these are the same failures with unlimited sky. Guy is indignant, and men with a smile admit that they are too well known. However, not on the best side. Men confess that although they do dirty work, they are not stupid enough to go against the meteoric rain, and emphasize that their entire team supports it. Mila is indignantly calling them weak, and says they will find someone else by grabbing a bag. But one of the men intercepts her and says it is a fee for giving up their services. The other adds what will tell everyone about their order. He lifts the bag and loudly declares all the tavern. It is the sword of the endless sky seeks revenge through their hands, and the price for that is 100,000 gold. All visitors rotate immediately and look closely in their direction. Guests laugh at them, charming that revenge on a lost duel is just miserable, and advise to give up. Guy barely restrains the rage, and Miss quietly orders him to leave. They come to the room. Guy from anger repels a chair and, full of fierce, splashes the poison towards mercenaries. Elle notes that they did not fulfill their request, although they took the money. The night voice adds, they would be severely studied for that. Miss sighs in response, now it is impossible for them. Alex notes that now they need to think what to do next, because it is all the money they have left. She complains, they say, even the room is not enough. Guy replies that you will have to work in the dungeon. Miss adds that they have already sold everything, and the Grove pays attention to the bracelet that is still wearing on her hand. He proposes to sell jewelry. The black girl holds her head firmly and shakes her head, because she can get as many as 3,000 units of magic. The young man asks if it is really so important to her. He looks at things with a smile and says that they now need money first, and for such a rare find you can buy hundreds of poors. After looking at them, the appraiser in the store reports that their cost is 6,000 gold. Misa with a grove begins to argue with the seller about the price, but he does not believe them and insists that it is just a cheap bracelet. Elcisa sighs tired and complains that hungry. 8 days remained before the rent date.